There I am. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. In case you noticed, I haven't been here. And so we are back. Day after the blood moon on the 333 manifestation portal, apparently. That's what I've been told. I've been told that's why Iran is being attacked by the United States. And yeah, so we are doing this live stream. And I'm joined by Justin Riggs, who you may have seen on We Are the People. So just for a little context, you may be wondering, where has LatterDayChad been? Well, I've been all over the place. I've been focusing a lot on work. I've had a lot of things going on. Now my hair's kind of shorter because I'm doing sales right now, so got to look fresh. I've been traveling to the north a lot, just doing different things. And Shane is not going to be on here for a while. Just like last week or something, he decided that he was going to have David Douglas take over stuff. He's going to have me doing some videos. And so we are joined by Justin Riggs, also known as LDS Abuse, and we are going to be talking about someone that people are calling, allegedly, I should say allegedly, before all this, for legal reasons, the Mormon Jeffery Epstein, which we're going to be answering. Who is this mysterious Gordon Bowen person that people have been talking about? Did he really design the logo for the LDS Church? Did he really, on court documents, talk about being possessed by spirits and participating in secret combinations on official records, and talk about how he fantasizes about Jesus Christ having sex with a horse? Are these real things that actually happened, or are these just rumors? And for the record, I would never hurt myself. And so if anything were to happen to me, well, I guess we would know what happened. There's mysterious stuff that happens. And let's be honest, if something did happen to me after a live stream like this, it would just draw a lot more attention to this sort of topic, if you know what I'm saying. So without further ado, I will allow Justin Riggs, and I will do my best to play devil's advocate, because here's another thing. If you would like to defend Gordon Bowen, and you're free to come on. We platform anyone. If you believe Adam is God, if you believe Joseph Smith's the end time server, if you believe the Holy Ghost is the end time server, maybe both, maybe one server, I don't know. Whatever you believe, we will let you talk about these things. But those are just the rumors I've heard. I haven't actually seen the evidence. I've just heard the horse stuff. I've heard the spirit stuff. So without further ado, Justin Riggs. How are you doing?
Good. How are you guys doing? Or how are you doing, William? Sorry. No, you guys.
I just got off work and I was trying to make the live stream. I kept telling David Douglas, switch this to 7:30, and I was driving behind someone who was really slow, and I just made it. So
Gotcha. Well, glad we could do this tonight. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Just turn up the speaker so I could hear you better.
Oh, here, let me try this too. I'll try it on my side as well.
Okay.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So do you have that? You had some stuff that you sent me about this, right?
Yeah.
Do you have your computer or that you could put on, or would you like to explain and I can get that pulled up because you sent it to me?
Yeah, maybe if you want to pull it up on your side. I'm on a Mac tonight, and so that was a PowerPoint presentation, so it's not going to work all that well. But in the meantime, maybe we can just start off while you're pulling that up, talking a little bit about who Gordon Bowen is for people who don't know anything about it. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah. So why are people calling this guy the Mormon Jeffery Epstein? Because all I've heard is rumors. I don't know anything about this guy.
Yeah.
I've been off in my own world. So sorry, I haven't done this in a while, so I'm trying to get you on the screen. Let's make you big. There, you're big. Okay, that's how it works.
Awesome. Yeah, so obviously Epstein's the big story right now, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing about Epstein is that he's this very wealthy, very well-connected man who is sort of pulling the strings and has set up sort of this network. Some people, at least before the files were dropped, really thought it was about blackmail, right? And using women and sexually abusing little girls, mostly, and some boys. I've seen some men come out and say that they were victims as well. And so, with Bowen, there's some things that are similar. So Gordon Bowen is a world famous advertising executive who was recently admitted into their sort of Hall of Fame. He spends most of his time out in New York. He's been the owner of a company called McGarry Bowen for a long time, that then changed to McGarry Bowen Dentsu. And so he's very well connected in advertising circles. And then, unfortunately, there's a lot of controversy around Gordon and his life, particularly around sexual abuse of men and children. And where he really sort of became known was in the Hamblin statements. And for those who don't know, there's the ritual abuse case that had been taking place for quite a while out there in Utah, centered around David Hamblin. But David Hamblin and Gordon Bowen have known each other since the 1980s, when they both lived in New York at the same time. So I think that, obviously it's easy to draw that comparison. I think there are some similarities. I think there's some real differences.
So here's a question. How well documented is this stuff? Because I've been told, as far as the Epstein files go, if you haven't seen the stuff, on the official Department of Justice website, we literally have statements that the FBI is aware of, where they are talking about literally doing occult rituals. Jeffrey Epstein is talking about magic and stuff that he believes in. He's talking about how he believes the human soul is made out of dark matter, which is a scientific term for a sort of element that we don't know what it is, but we just know it exists, right? There's even a file, I can pull it up in a little bit. I believe I have it right here on my phone. I don't know if I could get it on the computer, but it is file number on the Department of Justice website, EFTA00103831.pdf, where in the file, they actually detail how the people doing these sort of rituals actually believe that they are possessed by what they describe as outside entities. And they describe that they believe, so this actually goes to something I'm going to make a video on, about how the forbidden fruit in the garden was actually sex, right? I'm going to make a video on that. But they talk about how sexual energy is like spiritual energy, and how the entities basically feed on the energy of children. That's on the official Department of Justice website. I'm not making this up. I can show you the file. I just got off work. So is there anything similar evidence-wise, or is this just hearsay? Because I know you guys, you went on Ward Radio, and they kind of just laughed at you and didn't really give you a fair shot. So I would like to hear, because I've just heard these rumors about this Gordon Bowen guy, something about a horse, something about, I don't know if that's just a joke.
Actually. No, great question. So, and they invited me on Ward Radio, and then they uninvited me the day the show was supposed to happen. And so I didn't even get a chance to go on there. But so I think it's important to understand that there are several sets of documents. So this is very well documented. Sort of the craziest allegations come from the Hamblin statement, because that's where the ritual abuse is happening. And I think that goes to what you're talking about, William, where in the Hamblin abuse statements, there is an alleged, what they call an LDS Church of Satan, that these girls claim is operating inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sort of clandestinely. And inside of that organization, they're doing these types of things that you're talking about. So they're holding rituals, they're trying to harvest energy. David Hamblin is very much into Native American religion and that kind of a thing. So they're doing those kinds of peyote, they're giving the kids peyote, and then raping them and committing all kinds of abuse and that kind of a thing. And so there are definitely those kinds of things. And then one of the other sets of documents is Gordon Bowen's divorce case. And Lynn Packer, who I don't know if people know who that is, but he is a legendary investigative reporter out there in Utah, did a show on Gordon Bowen, and he was consulting in that divorce case. And they asked everybody to sign non-disclosure agreements, but Lynn refused to do that. And so we have an entire trove of documents that are housed up at the University of Utah that anybody can go look at. And in those documents, we have Gordon Bowen's journal. And in Gordon Bowen's journal, he talks very openly about the fact that he believes that he's been possessed by female spirits that are making him homosexual. And so in order to get rid of that problem, he employs some therapists like Mel Fish and Kissy Watkins, and then David Hamblin, who is the therapist. And so there are some very similar things along those lines. And the whole idea behind this is that Gordon Bowen was allegedly very high up in that LDS Church of Satan. He was what they would call a punisher. And so inside of that organization, that's a person who, if somebody had done something wrong and they had to go to a council, Gordon Bowen would be the one who would administer the punishment inside of that organization. So a lot of similarities along those lines. The other thing that's really important for people to understand, though, is that in addition to those types of allegations, there are what you would consider sort of more garden variety allegations. So there are multiple men who accused Gordon Bowen of just molesting them. Apparently, one of the things that Gordon liked to do was ask men to come over and sleep at his house because he was scared about the demons that were possessing him. And then once he got the men there, he would force them to sleep in the same bed as him. And then as they were falling asleep, he would try to fondle them, according to the court documents that we have. So there's those things. And then one really interesting thing is that his children accuse him of abuse, but they don't accuse him of ritual abuse. So there's some like really open questions about what's going on with Gordon Bowen, because if he was doing that kind of stuff, you would maybe expect his kids to accuse him of ritual abuse, but they never do. But they do accuse him of sexual abuse.
Sorry, that's interesting. I'm trying to find the email you sent me. I don't know if you could resend that or something, because I'm looking, I'm not finding it. But here's an interesting question for you. So with the Hamblin case, I remember hearing some stuff about it where it's like there was very strong evidence, but for whatever reason it was dismissed. Because again, I wanna give the other side of this argument a fair shot, right?
Yeah.
So is there what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so the thing about that case, there are multiple cases that involve David Hamblin. It goes all the way back to, I believe, 2002, 2003. And Goel is really the expert on this case. But the general idea here is this. So there are a lot of allegations and charges against David Hamblin. Some of them even were like considered proven. So for example, in his custody case, the court found by a preponderance of evidence that David Hamblin was sexually abusing his daughters. And yet, despite that fact, David Hamblin never spent a day in jail. He also was in arrears on his alimony payments by about $200,000. And despite that fact, he never spent a day in jail. In addition to that, he was poaching animals and he had peyote. He was possessing peyote, never spent a day in jail. And so by the time you get to this case that most people know about, this wasn't even a case that was supposed to be involving ritual abuse. The case that most people know about had to do with a girl by the name of Emily Sheets. And the prosecution in that case tried to keep the ritual abuse stuff out of the courthouse, but the defense wanted to bring it in. And I think that, in my opinion, that's because anytime you bring ritual abuse into a court case, you vastly increase your chance of being found not guilty, right? And so I think there are a lot of open questions, and there are a lot of people who are very skeptical about the way that the Hamblin cases have been handled. And it's just very difficult for people to understand how a man who has lived his life the way that David Hamblin has, by his own admission. So another example is that David Hamblin openly, he's on recording admitting that he raped his daughter. He says, "I'm sorry for raping you." And yet, despite that fact, we have a recording of him saying that, never spent a day in jail, right? So I think there's just a lot of open questions about how these cases have been handled and those kinds of things. And then, of course, the ritual abuse is something that everybody wants to talk about, right? I mean, going all the way back to the Pace memo in the 90s, this has been a topic that's been on Utahns' minds because of the way that it unfolded out there in that state.
Yeah.
Right.
So real quick, I don't know if you got my text message. Do you think you could send that slide thing you made with the information?
Yep, I am pulling it up right now.
I will text you my email again. And also, real quick, could you give a little bit of an intro of, actually, I'll tell what I know about the Glenn Pace memo, and then you can explain as well.
Sure.
So, let me switch my, let's see, boop. How do I switch me to be the big one? I told you, I'm forgetting how to do this thing. There I am. Let's make me big. Yeah, I'm big now. So, what is the Glenn Pace memo? And again, so a lot of times, like, this is something that on Ward Radio, they kept asking, like, well, if this type of stuff is going on, why hasn't it been prosecuted, right? Well, let me ask you this. The Department of Justice just released emails where proof, not just, they don't just have emails from Jeffrey Epstein, they have videos of the horrific things, not just child abuse, like actual sexual abuse. Like, I remember, so I mentioned this sort of stuff to someone I knew, and I don't think they understood that when I said satanic pedophiles, I meant like literally doing satanic rituals, like magic, right? I don't think that they realize that where the Epstein files are not only admitting that there has been sexual abuse of children done by current politicians and leaders of various countries. We have Prince whatever in England. I forgot his name. He's a weirdo. He's put in, right? But we have Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, right? And so many people want to make it a left versus right thing. Another thing that's in the Epstein files is that Ghislaine Maxwell was on Reddit starting the super far progressive left movement that we see now. And Jeffrey Epstein was on 4chan starting the alt-right movement. So they were radicalizing people to both sides to divide them against each other, where Democrats and Republicans used to be closer together, right? Meanwhile, the Democrat and Republican politicians were all going to Jeffrey Epstein's island together, and not only allegedly, I should say, abusing children, but also doing cannibalistic rituals where they are eating the flesh, like the Book of Mormon describes in Moroni chapter 9, that the Lamanites and the Nephites, it describes them essentially raping their women who are prisoners and then eating their flesh. And this is a warning about the secret combinations that we are going to see. Right? So the Glenn Pace memo, from what I understand, again, sorry, I need to text Justin my email. Or you can just respond to the other email I emailed you from, either way. But, or you can also, if you can get it on your computer, we can present it that way, share screens. But the Glenn Pace memo was something that was from Bishop Glenn Pace, as I understand it, and it was an actual report from the office of the first presidency admitting that there was satanic ritualistic abuse. I haven't read the whole thing. One thing that stood out was that they would do things like drowning children, like, and the children would like pray for Jesus to come save them, right? And Jesus wouldn't come. And then somebody shows up that says they're a servant of Satan who would save them and then rape them. Is that accurate to what I understand some of the stuff was? And it's like, by putting them through that trauma, it literally creates like a split personality where they don't remember the abuse happening. And I've seen that, like, going through traumatic things, going through any sort of like, especially like sexual abuse type stuff, can literally create a split identity just normally. So in this ritualistic, demonic sort of way where they literally believe that they are being possessed by spirits, it's much more intense, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything I'm like missing on that, or?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, so we did an entire 2-hour show. I've done multiple shows on the Glenn Pace memo, so I would really encourage people to go ahead and go watch those. But in short, like, one of the things that people need to understand is that the church had commissioned 4 separate memorandums on the topics of Satanism and ritual abuse. So not satanic ritual abuse, but these were separate memos, and some of them were on Satanism and some of them were on ritual abuse. And the last one that Glenn Pace put out was on ritual abuse. And you're pretty close in terms of like what you said about it. Glenn Pace interviewed about 60 people that were claiming to be victims of ritual abuse that were inside the church. And the kinds of things that you're describing were what happened. Like, Glenn would describe how these people would take their children and they would put them in a bag and then dunk them in water. And they would tell them, cry out to Jesus, like, pray to Jesus to save you. And then what they would do is they dunk them in the water. Nothing would happen, obviously. And then as the representative of Satan, they would save that child. So the child was left with this feeling that Jesus couldn't save, but that the representative of Satan could. And so these are the types of things. And then, of course, Glenn Pace also talked about cannibalism. He talked about child sacrifice. These were the things that were being reported to him. And one of the really great things about the Glenn Pace memo is that he spends the entire second half of the memo doing what you kind of just did, which is laying out the case from the scriptures of why he believes that this is probably happening. And I call it the greatest general conference talk that was never given, right? Because it's just like 6 or 8 pages of scripture after scripture explaining how the scriptures testify about these types of things are going to happen. The other really important thing for people to understand about this is that because of the Glenn Pace memo, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has an official position on ritual abuse. So in 1991, in the Deseret News, the church's public affairs department put out a statement in which they acknowledged that ritual abuse is a problem that's been going on for hundreds of years, and it's international in scope. And while they feel like the problem isn't numerically significant inside the church, for those that it has affected or that it may have affected, it can be serious, is what they say. In addition to that, the first presidency of the church sent a letter to all of the priesthood leadership in September of 1991, basically advising them that this kind of thing does happen and giving them instructions on how to handle it. So there are some people who want to pretend like this stuff doesn't happen at all inside of the church. But if you take that position, then you're taking a position that's against the church's official position that's been published in the Deseret News and with memorandums sent to all the priesthood leadership inside the church, right?
Okay. So I just was looking at something. The name hasn't updated. I was trying to change the name of the live stream, but I did. So this is the file I talked about from the official Department of Justice website. I don't know if we can blow that up a little bit. I'm trying to, if you've got it full screen, you should be able to read it, but I'm just going to read it off my phone because it's kind of blurry on this end unless I go full, you know what, I'll go full screen on that and get straight. So this is from, I believe, what was it called? File EFTA 00103831.pdf on the official Department of Justice website. And it first starts by describing, there were 2 pages of it. I just have the one here. The type of ritualistic abuse that Jeffrey Epstein and those sort of people were doing. It says on this page, these elite levels of human society, the answer is that entities operating beyond human sight, which mentally and emotionally possess these people, feed off human energy in general. But the energy they want more than anything is that of children before puberty. The hormonal changes that happen during puberty are only holographic expressions of a deeper energetic changes that the entities want that energy before those changes take place. When the pedophile is having sex with the child, the possessing entities are using the pedophile as a conduit to draw off the child's life force. The bloodline possessed, so this is something that's interesting as well. So with these ritualistic abuse things, you find out that it happens within like families where the parents supposedly, allegedly, they will abuse their children, and then their children will grow up to become the perpetrators and abuse their children. So the bloodline possessed are genetically and energetically stimulated to desire sex with children. And when they get what they want, the entities get what they want, the child's energy. This requires an endless supply of children to constantly repeat this process. And this is where Jimmy something and Thomas Ham, I don't know who those are. I see that I've written 5,500 words in this article, yet could have written 3,000, still not told the whole story of how Satanism and pedophilia are the foundation connecting the tissue of the global network of human suppression. People find it so hard to go there or to accept what appears to be so fantastic. But if the Salvile story comes to be pursued tenaciously and with an open mind, it can be a doorway to expose the darkest of dark, right? This is from the Epstein files. There's another file. I don't have the source file on it. I have a video of a person talking about it, where in one of Jeffrey Epstein's emails, he talks, and I'm going to go a little bit more about this in another video I'm planning on. I'm going to go into like the CIA's studies on supernatural abilities, on manifestation, on astral projection, on all this stuff that the CIA has done studies and shown, yes, there is supernatural stuff. It's very interesting that the CIA on their official website like seems to admit that supernatural stuff is real. It's weird. But I mean, if you understand what karmic retribution is, it's like supposedly it's a universal law that certain spiritualists and occultists believe in, that in order to do something, it has to either technically be true from a certain point of view, or it has to essentially, they have to gain your consent. So if I were to say, I'm going to do this terrible thing, then, and somehow put that out there, and you don't do anything about it, then you are giving consent. So if maybe the FBI and CIA are releasing these Epstein documents about ritualistic abuse going on and nobody's doing anything, then spiritually speaking, we are giving them consent. That may be, I don't know. But in that file, Jeff Epstein, he's talking about how he has found throughout the world, there are people who have supernatural, like telepathic, psychic type abilities, as they describe it, like higher levels of consciousness, and that most of them experience some sort of childhood trauma or sexual abuse that triggers that. And if we understand that our thoughts create reality, if we understand that God's power works through faith, as man is, God once was, as God is, man might become, that sort of thing, then we would understand, like, if you're in a traumatic situation, maybe your personality splits, your soul splits, maybe you develop things that you normally wouldn't have the faith to be able to do. I don't know. But this is on the Department of Justice website. And you have to ask yourself, like, because I've said this to atheists, like, okay, even if you don't believe in anything supernatural, the people who run everything and who preach atheism to the masses, they certainly do. So you have to ask why. Because even so, even if it was all fake, that's dangerous. That is dangerous that people at high levels actually believe that stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great document. I mean, and what's really helpful about that is what that document describes is exactly what's described in the Hamlin case. So in the Hamlin case, those Hamlin girls come from a bloodline that includes like a BYU professor, Richard Anderson, who was married to a woman by the name of Karma DeYoung. Karma DeYoung was the daughter of Garrett DeYoung Jr., or Garrett DeYoung, excuse me. And that's where Garrett Gong, the Mormon apostle, gets his name, because his mother was tied into the DeYoung family. She lived with the DeYoung family. And so this whole idea of bloodlines, though, is exactly what these girls describe. And so for a long time, when you're trying to describe this to people, they just don't understand at all, right? But then you get something like this file from the Epstein files, and people, it sort of shifts what we call the Overton window. And it allows us to discuss it in ways that we never have been, because people can see, oh yeah, this is the kind of thing that the elites, the people who consider themselves elites, are talking about and participating in. So that's a great document. I wasn't even aware of that one. So
yeah, and you want to know something interesting when you mention that? So there's been differing opinions when it comes to reincarnation in Mormonism, right? And we cover all sorts of stuff on here because people like Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were pretty explicitly teaching a form of reincarnation that people call multiple mortal probations. They were very explicitly doing it. The Adam God doctrine was explicitly that Michael Adam was an exalted being from another world who came down here to have another lifetime, and he went through the veil again. But there's also, and some things Joseph Smith said even kind of hinted at that. And there's people who claim Joseph Smith was teaching that through journal entries and stuff. But there's also a statement by Joseph Smith where, and people usually use this against the idea of multiple probations or reincarnation, where he says the transmigration of souls is a doctrine of the devil. And if you actually really look at what he's saying, so he encountered a guy who claimed that he was Matthias returned, and that it's because he was a descendant of Matthias, and the spirit of Matthias had been passed from father to son somehow. And then the report is that he cast a demon out of that person that appeared in bodily form. That's the story. But here's what's interesting. This idea, he's saying it's a doctrine of the devil. Does a doctrine of the devil necessarily mean it's a false doctrine? I don't know. If I like to think that spiritual matter can be sort of manipulated in whatever way, faith, and that's why we have good and evil and stuff. It's because both can have power. But what if that is what's happening with this ritualistic abuse, is that somehow these spirits that are possessing the people are being passed from father to son? And that's what the transmigration of souls actually means. It is a entity taking over body. That's why it's a doctrine of the devil.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. I'm really glad you brought this up. One of the things that Gordon Bowen talks about in his journal is this idea that one of the sons, so Gordon Bowen marries a woman by the name of Barbara Timothy, who was married to a man by the name of Stephen Timothy before she was married to Gordon Bowen. And in his journal, he talks about this idea of Stephen's spirit being placed inside the body of one of these sons. And so beyond that, here's something that I have not really talked about publicly, but tonight's the night, I guess. I was talking with another friend earlier today, and he brought this up, and I think it's actually a really good point and something that people should think about. So one of the things we see with the Hamblins and the Bowens of the world is that they are spending time in places like Sanpete County, right, in Spring City, and they are mingling with a group of people that in the early 1990s were excommunicated from the church, like the Harmstons, okay? And so there's sort of this thing going on. And again, this is just right after the Pace Memo. So in 1990, you had the Pace Memo come out. In 91, you have the church take an official position on ritual abuse. In 92, there's sort of this purge going on. And the church sends out another memorandum to all the priesthood leaders telling them things to look for that they should be excommunicating people for. And interestingly, they're really targeting people on the far right and the people that we would call preppers or doomsday folks, right? So they're looking for people who are homeschooling their children. They're looking for people who are stockpiling too much food, in their opinion. They're looking for people who are part of the John Birch Society. They're looking for people who voted for Bo Gritz in an election where he got something like 25,000 votes in an election. And so there's sort of this purge going on. And one of the people that gets caught up in that is a guy by the name of James Harmston, who ends up being polygamous, okay? And so what we think may be happening, because in the Hamblin statements, we can see the daughters testifying that people like David Hamblin were mingling and spending a lot of time with the Harmstons, okay? To the point where the Hamblin girls talk about how they would be taken up to the Manti Temple, okay? And with the Harmstons, and they would be let in through a side door so that these polygamist groups could do ordinances inside the temple, some of these rituals, which should remind people a lot about what happened with the FLDS church, okay? So it appears to us that are doing the research that there's sort of this commingling and intermingling going on between groups of people who want to hold on to these types of beliefs that you're talking about that Brigham Young taught and are having a hard time sort of following, quote unquote, following the new prophets as they want to move away from those things. And so there's sort of this internal battle going on inside the church. And the people like David Hamblin and Gordon Bowen are commingling with these people who want to hold on to these ideas of holding prayer circles inside of their homes, right? Or doing these types of rituals that the church used to allow up until like 1978, and then put a nix on it. So it's a really interesting topic and something that we haven't dug a lot into, but certainly we see that there are groups of people who want to talk about multiple mortal probation, right? And they want to talk about Adam God theory. And the church, because it wants to mainline and it wants to sort of cozy up to the Protestantism, they are constantly trying to like cut those things off, even though they preached it in the early church, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so that's a very interesting point. And like I can see it both ways. So it reminds me of something. Are you familiar? I might have asked you this. Are you familiar with like the Deuteronomist reforms?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
So here's what I think happened. I think that there started being weird stuff that was going on in Israel. And what they did to cut out the weird stuff was they got rid of anything spiritual and they just very secularized, almost Protestantized the religion. And that's where they lose this idea of Jehovah, the Son of God. That's why they lose like a heavenly mother. They lose all these doctrines because there was actual idolatry. There was actual like Baal sacrifice and stuff going on. And I feel like it's a case of where the pendulum seems to swing one way or the other. And we see this politically happening too, where it's like people who they will grow up in a very strict religious household. They go all the way over to like super far left progressive. And that's almost like their new religion. And they treat anybody who doesn't have that political belief like they're an outsider. And they become in the new cult, right? They have their own cult now, and they left the cult for another cult. Where with me, I've like landed in the middle where it's like I can sort of see this, I can sort of see that. Just do your best to follow Jesus. And I think it's a similar thing that kind of goes on where it's like when you start getting into the realm of spiritual stuff, weird stuff happens. And Joseph Smith, he even says like, you shake an angel's hand to know if it's an angel or a demon. And in the temple, Peter, James, and John show up, and it's like, well, here's how you do it. You shake the hand. And it's, I don't think like there's a
Right.
stupid tradition among like Mormons where it's like they think that they have to learn a secret Freemason handshake to get into heaven or something. When it's like, no, Joseph Smith, like the temple says, you shake an angel's hand to know it's a true messenger, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean, this is a huge challenge of being a part
yeah,
of a church that believes in continuing revelation and a restoration, right? And so, unfortunately, a lot of members of the church they don't understand Mormon history because they've only been fed this sort of whitewashed, correlated version of Mormon history. But when
yeah,
you actually go and look at things, I mean, you're just going to find a lot of contradiction, right? And for some people, it's very hard to like hold two things paradox in their mind. And when one prophet preaches one thing and another prophet preaches another thing, that becomes very difficult for people to hold on to. And that's where you get those broken shells that we hear about all the time. But
yeah,
this is just, the church just has a very difficult time. And I think they're trying. I think they're trying to like thread the needle on this. But the reality is, if you go look at Mormon history, it's chaotic and it's messy and it's difficult to understand what the theology really is. And it's difficult to understand like what's doctrine and what's not doctrine. And it's
yeah.
hard. It's not an easy task.
Yeah, like we have this tradition that Jesus Christ is like our older brother or something, but the Doctrine and Covenants in the Book of Mormon says that he's our creator, that he's the very eternal Father, and all this stuff, and it gets confusing because it's not what Joseph Smith was teaching, right? So here's one more question because we have the slideshow that you put together, ready to do it. So why is it that so many people are calling Gordon Bowen the Mormon Jeffrey Epstein? I've heard like 10 people now, I swear, say that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think overall it's just that like he's a very prominent, wealthy man who had access to corridors of power and was apparently involved or allegedly involved in things like ritual abuse. I mean, the allegations against Gordon Bowen in the Hamlin documents are some of the most like disturbing allegations. So, like just for example, all like there's 3 victim statements where the girls remember being taken up to Gordon Bowen's house. This is when Roselle Hamlin and David Hamlin were separated and they were going to get a divorce. And so they were drawing attention to this LDS Church of Satan. And so Gordon Bowen has to get involved as the punisher. And they take the girls up to to Gordon Bowen's house. And they get there, he's not there. They cook dinner. He comes, he eats dinner, and then he takes them into this sort of secret room in his house. Okay. And they call it the workshop. And in this workshop, there's supposedly torture machines. There's all kinds of knives. There are skin suits of human skin suits. There's a body hanging from the rafters. And he spends about 20 hours abusing these girls, forcing them to put on these suits, telling them all the horrible things that he's done, abusing them in horrific ways that I'm not going to discuss tonight on this live stream. But there's some of the worst allegations are allegations against Gordon Bowen. And so when people hear that kind of thing, I think they naturally gravitate towards things like Epstein Island, right? And in Epstein Island, you've got dentist chairs and you've got masks, like you got the mask that looks like Howard Lutnick, right? And so I think that they draw those parallels. I don't think, like, if I'm being fair about this, I mean, I don't see Gordon Bowen as being a power broker in terms of like trying to gather people in the same way that Epstein did. But what he is he's a person who's had access to the highest leaders of the church for over 40 years. So really quickly, I'll give a little bit of history about that, and then we can look at the slideshow if you want. So Gordon Bowen, his father, Wes Bowen, knew Gordon Hinckley, and they were good friends. And so when Gordon Bowen is getting ready to get married, let's back up a little bit. In the 80s, Gordon Bowen begins working for Bonneville Communications. And according to court documents, he starts cozying up to members of the Quorum of the 12 like Boyd K. Packer. And he's giving expensive gifts to Boyd K. Packer. And at the same time, he's talking poorly about his coworkers, getting people fired from Bonneville Communications. Well, eventually that catches up to him and he gets fired from Bonneville Communications. But even though he's been fired from Bonneville, church leaders, especially like M. Russell Ballard, continue to use Gordon Bowen for projects. I heard you mention earlier the logo of the church. And Gordon Bowen was highly involved in redoing, making the name of Jesus Christ larger inside of the new church logo. And so he was involved in all kinds of projects that ironically were supposed to be helping the image of the church. Okay. So what we learn as we sort of trace this through is that like at his wedding, he gets married in the Salt Lake Temple on the same day that the proclamation to the family is read by Gordon B. Hinckley. And he's married by James Faust in the Salt Lake Temple. And as soon as President Hinckley is done reading the proclamation on the family, he hops in the car, and we have pictures of him at Gordon Bowen's wedding reception, along with people like Mitt Romney. Richard G. Scott was there, if I remember correctly. Elder Ballard he spoke words at the ring ceremony that took place. And so, and then you move forward in time, and now we have reports of Gordon Bowen playing pickleball with Garrett Gong. We have Elder Uchtdorf allegedly having his birthday party over at Gordon Bowen's house. We have Elder Stevenson placed over there. And so Gordon Bowen has had access to church leaders all the way up until today. And this is what's really concerning to me, is that we just found out a couple weeks ago that Gordon Bowen is currently employed by the church to be the creative director for the Salt Lake Temple Open House that's going to take place next year, starting in April of 2027. And so the question becomes, why do church leaders continue to support this man and re-traumatize his victims? Because his victims have left the church, and they've been told over and over again about who this man is. They've had access to his journal writings. They've had access to all the court documents that they need. And yet, despite that, they continue to employ this man, support him, while members of the church leave the church because they're supporting this pedophile, right, and this molester by employing him for things like the Salt Lake City Temple Open House. So I think that's one way that's one reason that people call him the Mormon Epstein, is because he does have access to that highest tier, that highest level of church leadership.
Yeah, and I should say alleged pedophile. I should say, for legal reasons.
Yeah, you can say alleged pedophile. Gordon Bowen can sue me, because if he sues me, I'm going to take him into discovery, and we'll bring all of his victims, and we'll find out if he's a pedophile or not. But I appreciate what you're saying there. And if
I'm doing it as a joke, because I'm going to be honest. So I met a person who actually knows Gordon Bowen,
Okay.
and and they told me some interesting stuff, and I was like, what the heck? And based on some spiritual experiences I have had, it made me convinced, okay, maybe that's the actual real Satan we're dealing with. And I'm not going to share on here what that is, but it disturbed me, not because it was something graphic, but because it seemed accurate to revelation that I had received. Interestingly enough. But before we get into that, you ask why. And so I'm not sure are you a member of the LDS Church, or what are your beliefs with that stuff? I'm not sure. Okay, you are.
Yeah, well, I was. After I started studying LDS abuse and started talking about these things, and particularly talking about Gordon Bowen, about little over 2 years ago, I was excommunicated from the church for doing that. And
okay. And are you the one who runs the LDS Abuse Twitter account?
Yes, that's me. Yep.
Okay. Because I have seen some of your stuff pointing out some of the stuff like Tim Ballard talking about Isaiah stuff. And that's actually some of the stuff that we talk a lot about on this channel, where essentially the Isaiah stuff, it was very big early in the church. And the idea was that Isaiah was about the end times before the second coming. That's why Jesus tells us to read Isaiah. And interestingly enough, in 1907, the first presidency actually changed many of the footnotes about these Isaiah-related prophecies in the Doctrine and Covenants and Book of Mormon. For example, the one mighty and strong thing, it was changed from, in the original Doctrine and Covenants, a future messenger, to being about some random bishop who didn't fulfill what the prophecy was about, right? And then back then, there were many people like making break-off groups, claiming to be the one mighty and strong. There's a guy who's actually one of the ancestors of Shane Baldwin, whose house I'm at, that wrote a book called One Mighty and Strong about those events. But going into, prophecies, because the Book of Mormon is full of prophecy. The Isaiah is about prophecies about secret combinations. The Book of Mormon has prophecies about secret combinations. In Mormon chapter 8, I'm going to see if I can screen. And here's why it's interesting to me. So year before, 2024 fall conference, there was a very interesting conference talk by David A. Bednar called In the Space of Not Many Years. And two things that stand out when we're talking about this that David A. Bednar said was, one, he said, if you or I, so he lists himself, think that we can't succumb to that pride, we may already be under that pride, and we may soon forfeit our birthright for less than a bowl of pottage, which kind of makes reference to the third Nephi prophecies about that stuff, about the Gentiles who receive the fullness being rejected for their wickedness. But he also quotes Mormon chapter 8, which is interesting because a lot of people, like we've had split off groups, we've had people in the church trying to make changes, pointing to Mormon 8, where it says, why have you polluted the holy church of God? Claiming that it is about us. And we have an apostle seemingly agreeing where when Moroni says, I have seen your day, I have seen you, he says, that's referring to you. The Book of Mormon was written for the members of the LDS Church. So I would like to read that for our viewers in this sort of context. If I can get the screen to share this. Sorry, someone's just calling me. I might have to open up a new tab real quick. If you want to keep talking about some stuff, I just want to pull that up.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think just going back to what you're talking about, I mean, I think this is just a real challenge for the church. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that, like, because there's no like defined theology, and because nobody can quite put their finger on what's doctrine versus what's like, what was that guy who gave the talk who said that the words of prophets aren't like baseball cards and collector cards? They don't increase in value over time. I can't remember what his name was, Haney or something like that. But I think this is just a real challenge that they're having. And so there are many groups of people who want to talk about things like the Davidic sermon. So again, taking this back to Gordon Bowen, one of the interesting things about this is that people like Avraham Gileadi, who's probably the most famous person who talks about the Davidic sermon inside of the church, is part of that Hamblin abuse documents. In addition to that, the Hamblin girls talk about how David Hamblin and Rosie Hamblin were really enamored with talking with these people who had near-death experiences. Like, now, I'm not saying that they talked to Tom Harrison, but people like Tom Harrison, who comes from the Visions of Glory thing, which then rolls into this Tim Ballard thing that you're talking about, right? Where Tom Harrison is giving Tim Ballard priesthood blessings that were revealed because of the allegations against Tim Ballard. So the church just sort of has this constantly like royally, if I think about it like when a pot's getting ready to boil, the water will start bubbling a little bit. And I think the church is just sitting on a pot of water that's constantly ready to start boiling because people want to talk about these things and the church isn't willing to address them openly and forthrightly. And so you end up having these splinter groups, you end up having people form their own study groups, you end up people having their own thing, and then the church has to address it when it pops out into something like a Tim Ballard situation or a Jody Hildebrandt situation or a Ruby Franke situation or those kinds of things. And so they're always constantly playing catch up in this way.
Yeah, and here's something I'll say, because I would say I've studied the Isaiah stuff more than most people, and Joseph Smith explicitly talked about this stuff. He's like, there's going to be a modern day King David that rises up, and he's going to establish Zion and all this stuff. But here's something interesting that I've found in Isaiah, and I've started telling this to people. So in D&C 113, it talks about the Davidic servant stuff. It talks about a rod of Jesse and a root, and I think they're two different things. But if you actually read the Hebrew of Isaiah, it's a shoot. And if the stem is Christ, there is a shoot that comes forth from Christ. If we understand the body of Christ is the church, we could understand that that shoot is maybe Joseph Smith and the restoration. And one thing that stands out to me throughout Isaiah is at times there's clearly an individual servant, but there's also times where it's like, thou art Israel, O my servant. And it just hit me one day. It's like, maybe it's the collective people that are this shoot that, because so many people, they are waiting for King David to show up and fix things. They're waiting for Joseph Smith to reincarnate or resurrect or something to fix things. And who knows, maybe Joseph Smith and King David, maybe they're here. Maybe they're here, for all I know. But maybe they're waiting on you guys to actually wake up, right? Because here's the thing about what I've noticed with the Utah culture. Because I hate the Utah culture. If I hadn't had my own spiritual experiences, I'd want nothing to do with this crap. But you guys, so many of the people, like I've seen how many LDS influencers getting me upset about this stuff. We had Justin Riggs not being able to put on. There are people who would rather get upset about bullshit like drinking coffee than the fact that the first presidency is publishing things saying, yeah, there's satanic rituals. And there's going to be people who are more upset about the fact that I just said the word bullshit than the fact that there are people doing satanic rituals. So it's kind of giving me Pharisee type vibes where Jesus says, you worry so much about, I think it was about the outer vessel, the cleanliness of all these things, but the inner vessel is filthy. And I have to say, if you care more about those stupid Pharisee-like stuff, because I'm going to make a whole video on the word of wisdom, Joseph Smith was drinking alcohol his whole life. I have my own reasons. I don't necessarily like alcohol. I've drank it a couple times in my life. I'm pretty much a convert, but I don't think it's good for you. But it's this weird Pharisee-like attitude where these people are missing him. So if Joseph Smith is here, he's reincarnated or he's resurrected or whatever you believe, maybe he's waiting on you. Do you think the one mighty and strong is going to set in order the house of God? Because we have something called common consent, where we could have voted out Joseph Smith as the prophet. Remember, all those opposed? It's up to you guys and your faith, right? Because if you let stuff like this happen, it's your fault, right? So maybe when Moroni is saying, why have you polluted the holy church of God? He's talking to all of you. And I'm actually going to read that before we go into the slideshow and go over that presentation, just so people know what I was talking about. I can't pull it up on the screen. I'm on Shane's computer. I'm not used to doing stuff on there, and there's weird stuff with sharing screen. So I'm just going to read. It is Mormon chapter 8. This is what David A. Bednar was quoting. Mormon chapter 8:23, he says to search the prophecies of Isaiah, which talks about the drunkards of Ephraim and the hidden things of darkness being exposed and all this stuff. But he says, this is what David A. Bednar quotes, verse 35, behold, I speak unto you as if ye were present, and yet ye are not. But behold, Jesus Christ hath shown unto you me, and I know you're doing. And David Bednar pauses in his talk and says, that's talking about us. So I want you to imagine all these people with their stupid coffee and all this stuff. They're laughing at this stuff. They don't want to. Even the Department of Justice literally admits that all of our politicians are compromised by these secret combinations, basically, and nobody's getting arrested. And I know that ye do walk in the pride of your hearts. And there are none save a few of you who do not lift themselves up in the pride of their hearts unto the wearing of very fine apparel, unto the envying and strifes and malice and persecutions, in all manner of iniquities. And your churches, yea, even every one hath become polluted because of the pride of your hearts. So that's right after David Bednar says they're talking to us. For behold, ye do love your money and your substances and your fine apparel and the adoring of your churches more than ye love the poor and the needy and the sick and the afflicted. O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers who sell yourselves for that which will canker. Why have ye polluted the holy church of God? I want to ask you, what church? Is this the Catholic Church that's the holy church of God? If you're the very traditional Mormon, oh, they're all evil, they're all in apostasy. What's the holy church of God?
Yeah, look, I mean, so this is, this is where people get in trouble, right? And for me, it's like, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a prophet that would come out and talk about these things directly? But since President Benson, nobody's really been willing to do that. And I have some theories. I have some research. I have multiple episodes that I've done with various shows that talk about what I think happened historically that sort of led to this, what I would call sort of a leftward lurch inside of the church, right? I think to answer your question directly, like I don't want to bounce around it. Like, what other church could it be other than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? If you're a believing Latter-day Saint, there is no other holy church of God, because Joseph Smith said that all the other churches were an abomination. That's foundational to the religion, right? And I know that that's a little bit alarming to people now because this attempts to mainstream the church, and we have to be friendly to everybody, and it's all about peacemaking and all this kind of thing. But yeah, look, these are the kinds of questions that people are asking. And unfortunately, there just aren't a lot of great answers coming from the leadership of the church, in my opinion. And so it leaves some people out there dangling with their own interpretations and trying to figure these things out for themselves, right? Yeah,
and here's another thing. So many people, like, they refuse to believe this idea that there could be secret combinations in the church, even though that's what happens in the Book of Mormon. So right. This passage even more, I'm going to continue on it. I don't want to take too much of the time because I want you to give your presentation. But again, David A. Bednar said that this is it. Someone's quoting Fair Latter-day Saint to debunk this stuff. I'm sorry, Fair Latter-day Saint does not receive revelation. It is a secular organization trying to suck up to the Protestants, and I don't care what they think. And they get paid a lot of money by the deep church, allegedly. So I've heard. But Mormon chapter 8, again, why have you polluted the holy church of God? Why are you ashamed to take upon you the name of Christ? And you got to ask yourself, what does that mean? Why do you not think greater is the value of endless happiness than misery, which never dies, because of the praise of the world? And this reminds me of a dream I had that actually got me to start looking into this stuff, where I was shown stuff, and it turned out to be true, but yeah. And someone's saying that I made a false prophecy in October because I said this stuff was about to come out. I literally met with Tim Ballard. He invited me to meet with him, and he said that this stuff was going to start coming out on a specific date. It didn't, and I said that on a live stream. That wasn't a prophecy. I was told by Tim Ballard that it would start, and he's still planning on doing stuff, apparently. I still, whatever you think of him, that's what he's told, right? But to go back to this, the praise of the world is a very heavy thing. Why do you adorn yourselves with that which hath no life, and yet suffer the hungry and the needy and the naked and the sick and the afflicted to pass you by and notice them up? And here's verse 40. Why do you build up your secret abominations to get gain, and cause that the widow should mourn before the Lord? And it continues on, talks about the sword of vengeance, but it explicitly says that the holy church of God has been polluted by secret abominations. And I do think, yeah, there is likely going to be a modern day King David figure. I've done stuff about it. I've dove deep, and you know what my opinions on that stuff are, but you're the servant. I think that anyone who is willing to actually take upon themselves the name of Jesus Christ, because what someone says is, well, there's no mortal Davidic servant. And I'm like, Joseph Smith said there was. And you can choose not to believe Joseph Smith. You can say him and John Taylor, when they were talking about this, and John Taylor explicitly said it wasn't Christ, are wrong, right? But I think it's you. I think you are that shoot who comes forth from the stem of Jesse, if you're willing to be. And I think, yeah, it's Joseph Smith and it's us collectively. And, maybe Joseph Smith does return somehow. Maybe his spirit will be upon us to finish the work. But it's up to you to actually make a change. And your faith, if you believe there is going to make a change, the CIA has documents showing that manifestation is real and your thoughts actually create reality. So it's up to you, right? So now I will allow you to do that presentation. Sorry for taking up that time, but
no problem.
Let me remove this. Where is it? There it is. Gordon Bowen, the Mormon Jeffery Epstein. Yes, no, I don't know. Let's see.
All right, go ahead and go to the next one.
So I'm gonna
go ahead.
There. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So some of this is stuff that we've already covered, but I just want to walk everybody through sort of the logical argument here. Okay. So the first thing to remember is that back in 1990, Glenn Pace provided this memo to the Strengthening the Church Members Committee, which included Russell Nelson and James E. Faust. Okay. And the topic there you can see is ritualistic child abuse. And what's important for people to understand about this is that they did not want anybody to know that they were studying this. You can see written across the top is do not reproduce. And the only reason that we found out about it is that it got leaked to Lighthouse Ministries, the Tanners. And the Tanners put it out into the media and it got published, and the church was forced to acknowledge that this was real. So in the 1989, 1990 time period, the church is studying Satanism and ritual abuse. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so here's this, here is the statement that I was talking about, okay? So in October 1991, in the Deseret News, here is what it said. Satanic worship and ritualistic abuse are problems that have been around for centuries and are international in scope, said a statement issued Friday by the Church Public Affairs Department. While they are numerically not a problem of major proportions among members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for those who may be involved, they are serious. The church has strived to help local ecclesiastical leaders understand and deal with the issue. The statement said, citing a September 18th message from the First Presidency, quote, reaffirming their concern about such distasteful practices and encouraging vigilance in detecting and treating situations that may arise, end quote. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I just want to point out, like, the language here does not leave any room for people to argue that this does not exist. Okay, if you're a member of the church, your first presidency, your prophets and apostles, the men that you've sustained, have openly acknowledged and talked about having vigilance in detecting. They've acknowledged that it's something that's been happening for hundreds of years, international in scope, which we know it's a worldwide church. Okay, and then they say this thing about it not being a problem of major proportions. And I've always been confused by this because I don't think anybody has ever argued that it is numerically a problem. Like, if you take the church at its word that it has 17 million members or whatever it is, I don't think that you're talking about a statistically significant number of people, but you're also talking about a church that talks about the 99 and 1. And I love that scripture that you read too, because it's talking about, why don't you go out and find all these people? And I would add the abused into that list that was given to us. And unfortunately, it seems to me that the church has drifted too far towards caring about their image and assets and not caring enough about abuse victims, including ritual abuse victims. But if ritual abuse victims aren't a statistically significant problem, just normal abuse victims are. Okay, if the Mormon population is like the worldwide population, 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused and 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused. So when you take 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men inside the church, why are we doing such a poor job preventing that and then responding to the people who come to the church for help? Okay. So anyway, the point here is that the church has taken a position on this. So if we're going to be intellectually honest and we want a good place to start, let's start with the church's official position. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so this, after the 1990s happened, there are some court cases that happen. We're not going to go into that tonight, but it kind of disappears for a while. But in 2023, David Levitt, who's pictured here, who was like the Utah County attorney, gives this really bizarre press conference in which he comes out and he announces to the world that he is not a cannibal, although nobody's accused him of being a cannibal. But he also acknowledges that he's been named in this Hamlin court documents as somebody who's participated in ritual abuse. Because David Hamlin gets up and says that, all of a sudden a bunch of reporters perk up and they start making grandma requests, and a bunch of court documents get released through grandma. Okay. Inside those court documents, Gordon Bowen is listed as a quote unquote punisher inside of this alleged LDS Church of Satan that operates clandestinely inside the Mormon church. Okay. So that's how we sort of learn about Gordon Bowen, and Gordon Bowen's name gets sort of back in the news. Okay. Around this same time, Lynn Packer puts out a video that everybody can go watch and should watch on YouTube about Gordon Bowen and his relationship to M. Russell Ballard and Mitt Romney. Okay, so that's another source. So around the same time in 2023, Gordon Bowen's name starts to bubble to the surface again. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, here's something that Gordon Bowen wrote in his journal. Okay, he says, all of the abuse is satanic. The ritual abuse is different in its power and potency. Okay, so what does this prove? It proves that at the very least, Gordon knew and understood about ritual abuse, and he's writing about it in his journal. Now, it doesn't mean that he was practicing it. We know that Gordon Bowen was allegedly abused by his father, Wes Bowen, and maybe he was a victim of ritual abuse. Inside the court documents, people talk about Gordon having like multiple personalities that don't seem to know each other. Okay, so we don't really have a full picture of what's going on here because Gordon Bowen has chosen to remain silent. The church has chosen to remain silent. But what we do know is that in his journal, Gordon Bowen is writing things like the ritual abuse is different in its power and potency. So he seems to have some sort of understanding about this type of thing that you were talking about earlier from the Epstein documents. And it would be really interesting to understand what Gordon Bowen knows about ritual abuse. Okay, so nobody can say that Gordon Bowen doesn't know about this topic. We know that he knows for sure. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, we talked about Gordon Bowen and his relationship with the Brethren. Okay, it's very deep. One of the things we didn't talk about is the Jesus movie, and we'll talk about this later. But just really quickly, M. Russell Ballard utilized Gordon Bowen and allegedly paid him $20 million to make a movie about Jesus Christ. And I'm going to explain why that's especially troubling a little bit later here in the presentation. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, here's what we talked about. In terms of the brethren, we know for a fact that he's had relationships with President Hinckley, President Faust, President Packer, President Ballard, President Oakes, Elder Gong, Elder Uchtdorf, and Elder Stevenson. And then there are others that have been named, but we can't say those names out loud. But we know that he's had this long 40-year relationship while these brethren have been continually told about the alleged crimes that Gordon Bowen has committed and how it's affecting his victims and how it's re-traumatizing his victims for these brethren to continue to use Gordon Bowen over and over again on church projects, And despite the fact that they know that, they continue to ignore the victims of abuse and those affected by the abuse and continue to utilize Gordon Bowen for reasons that are unknown because they won't address it. Okay, so what we have here is on top is a shot from Lynn Packer's video of Gordon Bowen on the left and, of course, President Hinckley circled in red on the right at the wedding reception. And then on the right-hand side of that picture is Mitt Romney, of course, and Gordon Bowen is facing him at the reception. On the bottom is from the court documents, and this is just where it talks about how Gordon Bowen was sort of cozying up, particularly with Elder Boyd K. Packer, according to this person. And then what he would do, like I said earlier, is that he would go to Boyd K. Packer, he would complain about people, and then those people were eventually let go from Bonneville Communications so that Gordon could climb the ranks before he was summarily fired. Okay, I'm ready for the next one.
So here's something fascinating about that. So you mentioned Boyd K. Packer, and I actually have a very interesting story about Boyd K. Packer. So I did a whole video about this, but I happen to know that Glenn Beck had a meeting with Boyd K. Packer. So that video is about, so when I was trying to find answers about what was true, and the hardest thing for me believing in Mormonism was believing that the church was actually able to get revelation. Like, are those guys actually getting revelation? Like, the conference talks sound like a fortune cookie, right? But so I saw that video of Glenn Beck talking about how a religious leader knew about a dream he had and told him not to forget it. And it was basically about secret combinations in the government and that they were demons, right? And in case you can go watch that, sir. So I prayed about that. And I have a dream that shows me, like, I see people in the church and they're drunk on wine. There are leaders, there are members, and they're on this tower. And all they care about is the praise of the world, right? And I usually leave that part out when I say it. And then I see another group of people and they're kind of like in a corner and they're like whispering, like, what do we do? Like, they don't know what to do. And a man came from that wearing white clothing, and I recognized it as Boyd K. Packer when he was younger. And I've never said publicly who it was. But I meet a young man. As soon as I started my LatterDayChad page, I had like 100 followers. He kept DMing me. Turns out he knew Glenn Beck. Like, he like dated Glenn Beck's daughter. And his grandpa also was friends with Glenn Beck, and he told me that the person who talked to Glenn Beck was Boyd K. Packer, who appeared in my dream after I prayed about that and had that vision that like made me think stuff. And then when I meet Tim Ballard, he tells me the first thing he tells me is like, I know you're actually able to like tune in and get revelation because I know that for a fact that it was Boyd K. Packer that met with Glenn Beck. And you told me things that you said in that things you couldn't have known. So it's interesting that Boyd K. Packer appears to me in this dream warning about the secret combinations. And what I saw was a group of men who like, they didn't know what to do. And actually, specifically what he told me, one of the things, I've said this as well, is like, trust me, we know Satan better than you think, and he's not what you're expecting. And he also told me something personal about myself. And with that context, you have to wonder, like, is it that I don't even know, like maybe I would hope that none of the brethren are actually doing this stuff. I would hope. I would believe that. I'm going to put my faith in that. But let's say some are, hypothetically. Could it be that there are those who are like aware of this stuff and like, but they can't do anything? They're like amongst themselves trying to figure out what to do, but this runs so deep that they can't do anything like that, right? Like,
Sure.
it's interesting.
Sure, that's something I've heard. I mean, another thing that I've heard, and I actually know probably better than just saying that I've heard it, is that there is a belief amongst the brethren that they were deceived by Gordon Bowen. But the problem with that, saying that, is that I know for a fact, so like Lynn Packer reports about how M. Russell Ballard his office was called when they were going to make this movie, and he was told directly, you can't work with this guy. What if people find out that he's a pedophile and that the church is working with him? That would be terrible for the church. So they can claim that they were deceived up to a point, but at a certain point, they became aware of what Gordon Bowen has been alleged to have done, right? And they know that the fact that it's going to affect the image of the church, and yet they continue to utilize them for reasons unknown. So, and that's a really interesting story that you have there, William, like about that dream. And I don't have an answer for you. All I can say is that the court documents specifically name Boyd K. Packer as a person that Gordon Bowen was manipulating, right?
Okay. Yeah, and that could be, I don't know. Like, I don't know the story of what's going on. This guy says he had the same dream. Tim Ballard, he told me he had the same dream, and he's like, that's how I know you were visited by Boyd K. Packer, right? And you could argue, well, Tim Ballard, he was friends with Glenn Beck, and that might be how he knew, but that's what he told me the first time I have.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I think that's breaking news. I think you just broke news. So that's good.
Yeah, I've never said this before, and so I just knew at some point I was supposed to. But it's fascinating because we don't know the facets of what's going on, and like imagine you're involved, like you witness some of this stuff, and you know if you say so, like they're gonna do something to you, right? Sure. And you don't know what to do, and you're just doing your best to deal with it. You know, it could be that there are leaders of the church who are just waiting for the members to wake up. In fact, I'm not going to list the name on this one, but there was a grandson of a prominent general authority who was talking to a friend of mine, and he basically said, the brethren are aware of this stuff going on, but the corporate church has more power than them. Like think of like Spider-Man 1, where the Green Goblin loses his own company to the board of directors, right? Yeah. He literally, like this grandson of a well-known general authority says that like, they feel like they're helpless to do anything about it, basically, and that a lot of this stuff they claim is among like members of the 70 who think that they're calling elections make sure, which I'm going to do a video saying that's not what that means, but it's interesting, right? Yeah. Like we don't fully know the mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, a huge part of my research that we don't need to talk about today, though, is the church's involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency. And they made another decision back in 1984, and earlier than that, but the document that I have from 1984 shows that the brethren endorsed the mission of the CIA, but they know that it could affect the good name of the church, but they decide to endorse the mission anyway, right? And so, like I've said for a long time, that like I would just like I feel like the corporation is this parasite that attached itself to the spiritual body, right?
Yes.
And then it sort of has sucked the lifeblood out of that spiritual body to the point where, like what you just said, that apparently this grandson of this general authority, unnamed general authority said, which is that the spiritual body has lost the power and the ability to use its agency because the corporation is wagging the dog. That's one of the things that I said often in shows that I do, for sure.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So in Doctrine and Covenants 101, which is the parable of the redemption of Zion, it talks about how the Lord was trying to build a watchtower, and that the 12 watchmen on the towers, they fall asleep, and the enemy enters the vineyard, and he builds his tower instead. And it happens when the servants on the watchtowers get close to the money changers. That's what happens in the parable, right? But we also have these prophecies in the Doctrine and Covenants where the Lord's commanding Joseph Smith, you guys need to get close to the world and close to Mammon to blend in until the day of vengeance. And, but
I've heard both sides. Yeah, I've heard both sides of that argument. Yeah.
Here's something that is going to sound funny to people, but I'm deadly serious about this because I know that these sort of like, what you want to call them, Freemasons or cults or whatever. I don't think it's the Freemasons. A lot of people do. They tend to put weird sexual imagery and stuff. Has anybody ever noticed how the LDS church office building looks like a massive penis? Like, I'm serious. Do you think that could be like could that be the watchtower that the enemy built in the vineyard? Like, I'm serious on this. I'm trying to pull up an image right now. It is it literally looks like this.
Yeah, I published this a few months ago. I know exactly what you're talking about.
You covered this. So I'm going to save this image. I'm gonna save it as okay. Firefox would like to use your don't allow
And
my
while
location.
you pull that up, since we're getting into this, it's a little bit off topic in terms of Gordon Bowen, but let me just go into a little bit more about how my research started. So one of the things that I learned is that up at the University of Utah, back in 1915-ish, John A. Widtsoe testified about while he was president of the church, or president of the university, excuse me, that he overheard some members of the Board of Regents talking about how they were going to overthrow Utah, right? Overthrow Utah, and specifically by training the Mormons away. And one of the ways that I feel like they did this was through the secret society network at the University of Utah, otherwise known as the Greek living system. And we all know that the Greek living system is steeped in sexual misbehavior, right? And that kind of a thing. And so it ends up that a lot of church leaders are members of these secret societies, and they've made death oaths with groups like Sigma Chi and like Pi Kappa Alpha and those kinds of things. And then eventually they sort of, I don't know if infiltrate's the right word, but they filter into leadership positions inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So with that being said, go ahead and talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah. So could this be like I'm half joking when I say it's half serious? Could this be the watchtower from Doctrine and Covenants 101 that was built up when the enemy entered the Lord's vineyard, when they got close to the money changers, and literally to like mock us because they're like sexual predators? It is a massive penis. Why is the LDS church office building shaped like a massive penis? Because there's no way you don't see that. There's no way you're an architect designing this and they're like, we're going to have a stick right here, and then we're going to have two balls there at the bottom. There's no way.
Yeah, well, that's not even the picture that I published. There's one that's even more obvious than that. If you're looking down on the complex of the temple and the church administration building, the way that it's even more obvious than that. And it's actually like, I don't know if you believe in like sacred geometry or anything like that, but I do. It's those types of shapes. So I'll have to get that to you after the show so you can show it some other time.
Okay. We could do a whole video on why is the LDS church, like this would get views. Why is the LDS church office building shaped like a penis? I don't know. Because from here on out, Zion Media is not holding back. We're just going to say whatever you think it is. I don't know. But to go back to the presentation. So next slide.
Yep. So let's talk about some of the abuse allegations. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what a lot of people don't understand is that in addition to the ritual abuse allegations, there are other allegations from people in his life. So it's a little bit small, but I'm just going to talk about a couple of these. So one is a man by the name of Ken Kensinger, okay? Or Kenitzer, Ken Kenitzer. So Ken Kenitzer writes in the court documents, and he talks about how Gordon Bowen laid down next to him in bed and molested him, okay? So there's that. Then there's a man, this is a man, Adrian Pulfer, also testifies that during the night, Gordon reached his arm over my body and attempted to fondle my genitals. So it's not just ritual abuse with Gordon Bowen. And a lot of, especially members of the church that I talk to on Twitter, they want to focus on the ritual abuse because that's the thing that's easiest to debunk. And I get it, and I understand that, but like we have to look at Gordon Bowen in totality. And like, I don't think we're ever going to prove the allegations against Gordon Bowen related to ritual abuse personally. But what we do have is the same situation as David Hamlin. And my question is, why has nobody pursued these types of allegations and put Gordon Bowen into jail for these types of allegations not having anything to do with the ritual abuse allegations, okay? The one on the top is one of Gordon Bowen's children, who also testifies that the same thing happened, that Gordon Bowen would sleep in the same bed with him, would have him, and then he would molest him when they were sleeping in the same bed with each other. So there's multiple credible allegations of sexual abuse against Gordon Bowen that are outside the ritual abuse allegations. And I just want people to really understand that, because I think people could say in their heads, oh, these ritual abuse allegations are crazy, so I can see why the brethren would be working with him. But it's not just the ritual abuse allegations. There's these types of allegations as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you want to. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about the journal. Let's look at some things that he wrote inside of his journal, okay? I call these his delusional beliefs. I honestly believe that these are delusional. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And let me just give a little bit of background. So what happened here is that Gordon Bowen was trying to have the demons exorcised for him, or the evil spirits, or the unclean spirits, or what he calls them. he's trying to get those exercise, and he turns to a man by the name of Mel Fish. And Mel Fish tells him that one of the ways to do this is to start a journal and to ask a question, and then whatever comes into Gordon Bowen's mind is God, and he should write it down, and he should take that as personal revelation. Okay, so here are some of the things that Gordon Bowen writes in his journal. It says, "You are a chosen son." This is supposed to be God speaking. "You have been a conduit of evil spirits that are legion, not a few, but battalions sent to destroy your work and works. Your sins were foreordained," and then listen to this, "so you could learn the secret combinations, words, signs, oaths, and songs." Okay, so anybody in the church should recognize this as Gadiant and robberish kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. And here's something I'll say on this. So, devil's advocate here. There are certainly mistakes I've made in my life that I believe were meant to teach me a lesson. And, the atonement is infinite. But at the same time, I think there's a certain line where it's like people would go completely delusional. If these claims of like this psychotic stuff that those girls were saying was true, it's like, this is somebody who's completely delusional in this stuff. But I'm also familiar with this technique. It's called automatic writing. I believe that's what's right.
Okay. I don't know.
So I'm very familiar. I'm someone who's a complete weirdo into all this weird spiritual stuff who happened in Mormonism. I'm not a Mormon who became weird, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would just say, look, here's the problem. If you believe in the foreordination of sins, then you have to accept that Gordon Bowen was foreordained to fondle men and abuse children. And I personally refuse to accept that. So that's just me. I don't believe that the foreordination of sins is doctrinal, in my personal opinion. Here's something else that he wrote. "Eric," which is one of his sons, "needs hard masculine love from you. He's asking for it. He has felt some sexual desire towards you, which confused him because he is not homosexual. All her," meaning Barbara's, "boys are sexually wounded. They came into life that way genetically. Steve," that's their father, Steve Timothy's stuff is in them. Okay. He also says, "The healers had helped him to see that he had two evil female spirits in his body that had caused his homosexuality." And then, so according to Gordon Bowen, when he starts therapy with Mel Fish, he's 90% homosexual. They cast out these evil female spirits. And then according to Gordon, he's only 10% homosexual at that point. Okay. So that's the story from Gordon Bowen's journal. The last thing he says here is, "I've had conversations with Gordon in which he has told me that he is convinced that his homosexuality and the struggle he has had with is the result of some sort of evil presence that inhabits his body." And I honestly feel for Gordon Bowen on this, because as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who struggled with same-sex attraction, I think that people who struggle with that, Gordon is sort of forced into these positions to come up with explanations for why he's experiencing that. And then he lands, like he gets sent to these therapists, and this is where he lands, is this idea that he's being possessed by evil spirits, right? Which, again, I personally don't believe that people are homosexual or experience same-sex attraction because they're possessed by evil spirits. I just don't believe that personally.
Yeah,
but these are the types of things that he was writing.
Sorry, go ahead. One thing I'd say is I think it's more likely that whatever, like, I think this right here, I think he was channeling something outside himself.
Right.
I don't think it was God, because
Right.
the actual evil spirit telling him, allegedly, if it's maybe this was made up. I don't know, Gordon Bowen, don't hurt me. I would never hurt myself, by the way. No one around me would ever hurt themselves either. But allegedly, he said that he was supposed to have a sexual relationship with his own sons, and that God was telling him to. Well, it might be the God of this world we're talking about, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree that whatever it was that was coming into his mind at this time was not God. And then the question becomes, well, like, why isn't his therapist helping him understand that this is not coming from God? Where's Mel Fish in all of this? If he's giving him this homework of writing it, why isn't somebody guiding Gordon and helping him understand that, like, you don't say these things? Because he does talk about, he openly asks questions about, have I abused my children in the same way that my father abused me? And the story goes that his father, Wes Bowen, stood by while Gordon was sodomized. And in a deposition, Gordon denies that he used the word sodomy. But the testimony of the person that he told the story to is that Gordon Bowen told him that he was sodomized while his father watched on. So like Gordon Bowen, I think everybody can see pretty clearly that he was a deeply troubled man who did some really bad things. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that Gordon Bowen was a child who had very bad things happen to him as well. And he needs to be held accountable for what he did. But we also have to have some sort of context into like why this person turned out the way that he did, if that makes sense. All right, go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, this goes to what you were talking about earlier in terms of the homoerotic writings of Gordon Bowen. So go ahead and go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about the Black Horse, okay? So Gordon Bowen wrote multiple like books or screenplays, and in these he would talk about what he called penis exercises, and then he wrote a story called The Naked Jesus. So it sounds like you've heard a little bit about this.
Exercises?
Yeah, so we're gonna read about this, okay? Because this is his words.
Oh, okay.
And so, and it's gonna sort of clear up a little bit of confusion that you had about this particular story that it sounds like you heard. So in one of the stories, though, he writes, and for those of you who may have been abused, there's a trigger warning. I need you to go back to the last one for me. There you go. So I just want to give the trigger warning here because this is graphic, okay? So if you need to turn away or mute this for a few minutes, go ahead and do that. But he writes, open with a child, long blonde hair, blue eyes. She's in prison. As far as I can see are thousands of adult men, naked, all have extremely small penises, but they are fixated on them. In fact, all are doing exercises of some kind or another, trying to make them longer. Okay.
I believe that's called jelking.
Okay. And so, and this is like a common theme in Gordon Bowen's writing, and also in the stories that he tells people that are really inappropriate that they testify about in the court documents. In a second thing that he wrote, he talked about the naked Jesus. Okay. And this is from Lynn Packer's presentation. It says, a juicy, naked, free of cleaning cloth, engorged Jesus mounting a black horse, wrapping his bare thighs around the hairy mane. It seems that Bowen's story infers at times that he is the horse that Jesus mounted. Okay, so that's where I think the little bit of confusion about what you said earlier comes in. But so the story goes that Jesus is naked, he mounts a horse, and based on the context of the story, it sounds like Gordon Bowen is the horse that Jesus mounted. Okay, the horse says or thinks, so if it is Gordon, it's Gordon's thinking, I am ready for this eternal rider. Rub me, mount me. Okay. And then the last thing that I'm going to read about this is what Gordon writes. He says, children run forward. There are hundreds of them, but a chosen few come forward with outstretched arms and begin to stroke me, touch all my hidden places, the tingling tenderness. I feel overwhelmed with awe. Right? And so you've got Gordon Bowen writing these homoerotic stories, some of them about our Lord and Savior. And then let's go on to the next thing. Go ahead and go to the next slide, because here's where the church employs Gordon Bowen to make a movie about Jesus Christ. Okay, and this is what really, personally, really got me upset when I first learned about Gordon Bowen, was learning that Elder Ballard hired Gordon Bowen to make this movie. Go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll talk about it. So according to Lynn Packer, Elder Ballard chose Gordon Bowen to make a movie about Jesus Christ despite knowing about his homoerotic writings, and he paid him $20 million to make this movie. And so this is Lynn Packer's words. As the project began, a member of the church who knew Gordon Bowen wrote Russell Ballard describing Bowen's unsavory reputation. Quote, what if it comes to the attention of national press, this man has so much influence with LDS leaders and he's a child molester? It would be terrible for the church, end quote. The member who wrote the letter got a phone response from Ballard's secretary saying, quote, we're keeping an eye on him, end quote. The project proceeded under Bowen's direction, and at least a rough cut of the movie was produced. The rest of that story is just that they moved, the movie was so bad, they screened it for a couple of the brethren and some other people that were there. And it was so bad that they sent it to Bonneville Communications to try to fix it. It was so bad that Bonneville Communications couldn't fix it. And so as far as we know, that project has just been shelved forever. And we're never going to see this movie that Gordon Bowen made about Jesus Christ. So luckily. But of course, the question is, why is a man who's supposed to represent the name of Jesus Christ, giving this project to a man who desecrates the name of Jesus Christ by writing homoerotic stories about him. And I think that's something that people just need to wrestle with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I bet if what you're saying is true, I bet Gordon Bowen would have cast himself as the donkey that Jesus rides into Jerusalem.
Right, something along those lines. All right. Okay, so now we're up to some very recent news. And we need to ask ourselves the question, was Gordon Bowen trafficking a human trafficker? Which again goes to this idea of Gordon Bowen as the Mormon Jeffrey Epstein. So the reason that we're going to ask this question is on the next slide, that very recently Goel broke the news that another lawsuit has been filed by the Hamlin daughters. Go ahead and go to the next one. And this lawsuit, it alleges violations of the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which is the act that is about human trafficking. And in this lawsuit, Gordon Bowen is named as one of the defendants. And so we now have to ask ourselves, was Gordon Bowen involved in human trafficking? Now, this particular lawsuit has some problems attached to it in that it shifts some timelines that the Hamlin daughters had testified to in their other cases. And so it's something that we're taking a really close look at. But I want people to be aware that there are some problems that get caused by this new lawsuit that the Hamlin daughters have filed. But I also do think it's important that people understand that the lawsuit has been filed and it does name Gordon Bowen as a defendant, as you can see where I highlighted it. Okay. I think that may be, go ahead and see if there's any more. Oh yeah, so here's the church employee part. Go ahead and go. So this is another thing that we just learned just a couple of weeks ago as we continue to do research and sources continue to come forward. So Gordon Bowen, this is his biography on the Advertising Association's Hall of Fame website. And you can see down there, the highlighted part says, Gordon leads the creative team for the Salt Lake City Temple Open House, opening in the spring of 2027, which expects to welcome 7 million visitors. And so what we can see is that even with Elder Ballard passing on, Gordon Bowen continues to do work for the church on projects that are related to the house of the Lord, right? And I just can't bring myself to believe that Jesus Christ would be happy knowing that the creative director is this man that we just went through all this evidence of the things that he's done. And yet he's leading this project hired by the prophets to reopen the house of the Lord in Salt Lake City starting in April 2027. And everybody can come to their own conclusions about that, but it's a reality that he works for the church today.
Here's a weird question. Like, how does he even get this connection to the church? Is it like his dad and they just keep going back and forth? And here's a better question. If his Jesus movie was supposedly not something that like they thought was so great or whatever, what made them think, like, is he a director or something? What made them think, you know who I need to make my movie about Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
That's the perfect guy. That's who I need. Like, I'm serious. Like, you have to ask yourself, like, is there, like, because even, like, this goes back to that theory that it's, like, a corporate church thing and that maybe the brethren don't have as much power. Is there, like, some sort of shadow government within the corporate church or what's going on? I don't know.
Yeah, so there's certainly like shadow committees like the Special Affairs Committee that's run out of Washington, D.C., that Beverly Bruff Campbell tells us they don't keep an agenda and they never take notes because the things that they're talking about are too sensitive to write down. We know or we don't know, but it's likely that type of committee is the one that took on when President Nelson's daughter Brenda Miles was accused of being part of a pedophilia ring in Bountiful. We know that a member of that committee by the name of Ralph W. Hardy Jr. sent abuse cover-up instructions to his brother in Salt Lake, David Eccles Hardy, and David Hardy walked those abuse cover-up instructions over to Russell M. Nelson and hand-delivered those to him. So yeah, I mean, we know that there are these kinds of things. We also know that there are programs that were run by David M. Kennedy and Beverly Bruff Campbell that were outside of normal priesthood channels, and yet they were being run out of the church office building. So I don't think there's any question that those kinds of things are happening. I don't know how nefarious it is. And I know Tim Ballard talks about the deep church. I don't know like what he means by that. He's never really gone into it. So
I can actually tell you that. So Tim Ballard, actually, it's an interesting thing. That it's a friend of mine who actually came up with that term deep church. And Tim Ballard kept going on about the deep state in the church. And I suggested, actually, maybe it's easier to just call the shadowy people in the church the deep church. So it's like this idea that there are shadowy people that are maybe manipulating things that don't have priesthood authority, they're more corporate or whatever. It's the deep state, but for the church. And it was a friend of mine that kind of coined that term, deep church. And he actually texted me because he was watching Tim Ballard's videos. He's like, you know Tim Ballard? I'm like, yeah, I've talked to him. I know him. I met with him, right? And he's like, can you tell him to stop saying deep state in the church? It's going to make more sense to people if he starts calling it the deep church. And so that's what it is. The deep church just refers to this idea, like, actually, I don't even think it's necessarily my friend. I've heard it. So there's a guy who, I'm not going to list the name. He's sort of prominent in some LDS apologetic type stuff, more so. But he talked a lot about how certain channels are influenced by what he calls the deep church, where it's like certain influencers and channels are being paid off by like the corporate side of the church to essentially put out propaganda for certain opinions. What he suggested was that there are certain channels who are emphasizing the Book of Mormon took place in Mexico, in Guatemala, it only took place there, and that it was an agenda that the church was pushing, which I've seen some evidence for.
Okay. Yeah.
Not to list channel names, if you know what channels like really push that, you know what I'm talking about. But that was the allegation. I've heard various claims, and I'm not going to listen to them, of very prominent LDS like influencers that they get a check for like $40,000 to basically put out church content, and they're doing, oh, but here are the lines you have to stay within to say stuff, and maybe say this specific thing and that specific thing, and maybe that's why. Maybe Ward Radio did want to have you on, and maybe they were told by somebody not to have you on. So
I don't think they want me on. we've been going at it for a little while now. I don't think they want me on. That's fine. Okay. I mean, it's their platform. I wish that they would not gatekeep. If they're going to send Jonah Barnes out to go on Latter Daily Saints and talk about ritual abuse and share all kinds of misinformation, I wish they would give me equal time. That only seems fair. But that's their decision, and they can do whatever they want about that.
Right.
So I mean, I think your questions, like you asked some questions a little bit earlier. We do think it was through his father, Wes Bowen, who knew Gordon Hinckley, because Gordon Hinckley was involved with KSL, as was Wes Bowen. Gordon Bowen's dad was a jazz musician, and he was also the host.
1 second. I'm going to get some water, but I am listening. So I just want to make sure you know I'm listening. I'm just grabbing some water because my throat's a little scratchy.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so Wes Bowen was the host of some jazz, like a jazz show on KSL. And so we do believe that Gordon Bowen was introduced into church leadership through his dad. What we don't really quite understand is why the church was continuing to employ him after he got fired from Bonneville. That's a really open question, because the church Bonneville is the church's media arm in a lot of ways. And so if a man gets fired from Bonneville, we don't really understand why they would continue to do work with him. And then we especially don't understand that last question that you asked is a really good one, because while Gordon Bowen is an advertising executive, he is the idea guy. He's not like a filmmaker. He's not the guy behind the camera. He's not the guy doing like that kind of stuff. He would be at the shoots. Like, there are stories about how Gordon was supposed to be at commercial shoots, and he would show up and he would just sleep by a trash can the entire time, right? And so, like, it's not that he's not around like filmmaking and commercial shooting and stuff like that, but there's no evidence at all that he was a filmmaker of any kind. So yeah, if you're M. Russell Ballard, what gives you the idea that spending $20 million of church money to get this guy who has no experience in filmmaking to make a movie about Jesus Christ? That doesn't make any sense at all. There's a lot that just doesn't make sense about this relationship between Gordon Bowen and the Brethren. And I don't have firm answers, and they won't talk about it. So unfortunately, we have to come on here and do a little speculating, right? And I think one of the things that concerns me is this idea of, does Gordon Bowen have leverage on the Brethren that allows him to continue to do these projects? Because if they don't keep feeding him work, there are things that he knows about the Brethren that they just can't let out into the wild. And I think that's a reasonable thing to believe, because The brethren certainly aren't converting Gordon Bowen. They've had 40 years to bring him. He was excommunicated in 2002 or 2003. I can't remember. But so they've had 20 something years to bring him back into the church. They haven't done that. Like, I can't believe that they think that he's a great guy to spend time with, right? Garrett Gong plays pickleball with him. But like, is he
What?
really a great guy?
Wait, hold on. Elder Gong plays pickleball with him?
Yeah, we have multiple independent witnesses who have testified to that. And so, and so we believe that Garrett Gong is working up with Gordon Bowen on several projects. And so, or at least a couple projects, I should say. And so, but why? Because he's a great guy? No, like the court documents show dozens of people calling Gordon Bowen the most evil person that they've ever met, talking about how he stole their work, talking about the pornography that they found in his apartment, talking about like how he would lie, how he would cheat, how, like just so like I have a hard time believing that these men who are supposed to have the spirit of discernment about them think that Gordon Bowen is a great person to be spending time with, particularly when I was taught growing up in the church not to make sure that I'm careful about who I spend my time with so that I don't sully the name of the church by spending time with the wrong people, right? So like logically you work through the reasons about why this could be happening, and unfortunately you come to this sort of uneasy place where it looks like Gordon Bowen may have leverage on the brethren, and that like because of the types of activities he's involved in and because of his proximity to the brethren, it's not out of the question that maybe some of the brethren were involved in some behavior that they weren't supposed to with Gordon Bowen. And so now they have to keep feeding him work so that he doesn't ever tell those stories.
Right? And here's I'm gonna be optimistic on this, right?
Sure.
So
yeah, please.
Let's say there's one big thing, like some person in the church, maybe a higher up person or someone connected to a higher person. I don't know. Let's say hypothetically, maybe they did something bad and he has the evidence of it. And he knows if hypothetically, if that was released, it would ruin the entire church. So all of the brethren, they just have to play along. And they're like, hey, Elder Gong, he wants to play pickleball now. You better go play pickleball. And then Elder Gong.
Right. And I mean, look, and let's just be really, really clear about this. Like, that's not even the most optimistic. The most optimistic view is that I'm just dead wrong about this. Yeah. Right. So, but who could put this to bed? Well, the brethren could put it to bed. Now that more and more people are learning about their relationship with Gordon Bowen, the thing to do, in my opinion, if they have integrity, is to come out and address it publicly and put people's minds to rest. But unfortunately, it appears to me, again, this has to do with the corporate versus the spiritual body. It appears to me that the corporation has come to this determination that it's okay to lose some of their sheep, right? It's no longer the 99 and 1. It's like, well, hey, if 9 or 10 wander away and we lose them, as long as the profits are good, as long as the barn looks good, as long as all of our tools are in good order, as long as the pasture is good, if we lose a few sheep because people are finding about our relationship with the CIA and Gordon Bowen, so be it. And that's just not the church that I thought I grew up in, right? And so, but it appears to me to be that people, like the brethren are like going to be silent about this, no matter how many people leave the church over it. And people have left the church over it, right? Including his victims. And to me, that's the saddest thing of all, is that this church that should be meeting the needs of these victims let these victims walk away because they were re-traumatized by this relationship between Gordon Bowen and the brethren. And the brethren just looked at it and said, bye-bye, and went back to Gordon Bowen and said, here's $20 million. Like, what could they have done with that $20 million to help these victims heal? Instead of giving it to this man who's clearly troubled and is engaged in some really bad behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's puzzling. And here's another thing about Jeffrey Epstein, for example, is he was connected to all these powerful people, and nobody even could figure out what he did. Like, he was like a college professor or something. You're like, this guy, like, he wasn't even smart at the stuff. He wasn't even good at it. And they're like, why is he connected to these people?
Well, and we didn't talk about this, but in Gordon Bowen's life, up until he owned his company, he was fired from, I think, at least 5 or 6 of his early jobs, right? And yet, despite the fact that he was getting fired, he continually landed on his feet in better jobs somehow, right? And so there's the same question that you have with Epstein, you have with Gordon Bowen, which is, why is this man continually failing upwards? Who did he know that continued to put him in positions of success, despite the fact that he was failing repeatedly at the jobs that he had to begin with? And so there's that parallel between Epstein and Bowen.
So here's something interesting. So I will address something I said earlier about how some stuff I was told about some of this Gordon Bowen stuff. And I've heard this from multiple people, by the way, about the alleged LDS Church of Satan. It disturbed me in a way, not because it was graphic or anything, but because it was accurate to what I had received revelation on and led me to believe, okay, these aren't people that are delusional. And one thing I'm going to say, this is my personal revelation, that I was told that they believe and that I've received revelation on, is that Satan and Lucifer are not the same person. And that there is like a satanic godhead, if you will, of sorts. And that Satan is some, and we actually see a hint of this in the book of Moses, which got me to ponder and pray on it, where in the book of Moses, it says, the serpent was led astray by Satan. And if you understand ancient Hebrew mythology and theology, and this is going to be in my video on the forbidden fruit being sex, is that a serpent is a seraphim, right? A seraphim, which is a type of angelic being, was symbolized by a fiery serpent with wings. And when the serpent is told, you will crawl on your belly, that is that seraphim, that angel losing its wings. And in fact, in an apocryphal Adam and Eve account called The Life of Adam and Eve, it's Armenian, I believe, he's not a serpent at all. He is an angel, and he has his garments of glory taken from him, which represents a resurrected body when he falls. So there's an idea that maybe Satan had a body, and that, you know, he gave the forbidden fruit, and then he had his body taken from him, or Lucifer, I should say, not Lucifer. But in the book of Moses, it explicitly says that Satan had led many astray after him, and that he led astray the serpent and put it into the mind of the serpent to say this. And if we're going to assume it's not a literal snake, that serpent is an angel, is a fallen angel, is Lucifer, that's sort of where I got that idea at first, where it's like, maybe the guy that we think is the big bad guy was led astray by somebody else. I don't know, just an opinion I've had, that like maybe there's some sort of greater darkness out there that we're not aware of. And so being told that allegedly they believe that their godhead is Satan, Lucifer, Cain, allegedly, that disturbed me.
Yeah.
Right?
I would encourage everybody to go read that part of the Hamblin statements. There's a whole part of the Hamblin statements that does not talk about crimes, but it talks about the doctrines and the theology of this LDS Church of Satan.
Okay, is that in there then?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody can go to investigations in ritual abuse, which is goelsite.com, and you can find this document. It's like 140 pages and like not the whole thing is this, but, and here's what I'll say about that. I'm really glad you brought that up too, because people like David Levitt get up and give this press conference, and they call these girls tragically mentally ill. Okay. And I don't have any personal knowledge about these girls' mental health issues. And so I'm not going to speak to that, but here's what I am going to say. The way that these girls describe these doctrines and this theology about this LDS Church of Satan does not come across as tragically mentally ill women. It comes across very like it's very logical. Like it makes a ton of sense in terms of inverting normal Mormon teachings. It seems like the rituals that they're doing make sense. They're not crazy. Like it's not wild stuff. It's just inversions of what you would expect to experience inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so to me, that part of this story comes across as very credible. And again, it's kind of this cross-pollination of these polygamist groups and then these people down in like San Pete County and that kind of a thing, like where I think you just see some people who want to continue to explore things that used to be taught by the church but are no longer taught by the church. And then you end up with this sort of like really out there group that calls themselves the LDS Church of Satan. And it's not even just one group. If you read the Hamblin daughter statements carefully, you'll see that there's a lot of different groups and they do things a little bit differently, which again, to me, lends credibility to what those girls are saying. Because if you were making the story up, you would just say, oh, there's this one group and this is the head of it, and this is what they do, and blah, blah, blah. But that's not what they say. They say
Yeah.
there were all these sort of subgroups, and depending on whose house you were at, they would change it a little bit, which makes a ton of sense to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's like, it's that theology from what I've heard about it that actually like disturbs me. And I'm going to share a little bit of my opinions, and I can back up these opinions with scripture, and I can do videos on this stuff, and I truly believe this is legitimate. So to share some of the things that I believe the Godhead, the true nature of it is Father, Son, grandson, right? And it is a tradition in even before the LDS Church that Cain was the son of Lucifer, that there was sort of this idea that what happened in the garden was Lucifer raped Eve, right? And that Cain is actually it. And you can point to the scriptures where Adam says, when he has Seth, finally, a son after my own likeness, right? Or where he's told, I will put enmity between thy seed and the seed of the serpent. And you can ask, what's the seed of the serpent? Right? And we have all these stories in the book of Enoch about fallen angels having children with human women and all that stuff. But so I believe that. And then with the LDS Church of Satan, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Father, Satan, Son, Lucifer, and grandson, Cain. And I'm going to do a video of this explaining. We've actually had general authorities talk about similar stuff, about how there is a difference between the Spirit, which is the mind and power of Christ, and the office of Holy Ghost, which Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball actually seem to believe they held the office of the Holy Ghost. They were at that ranking. And I also think in the scriptures, there's actually evidence to point towards certain figures such as Melchizedek or Abel, Cain and Abel, being somebody of that level of the office of Holy Ghost, which is different from like the Holy Spirit that is in all things, through all things. You know what I mean, right? It's the, and that's why we see sometimes it's like it's a person, sometimes it's like an energy. That's just more like my opinions and stuff that has come to me. So I'm seeing this doctrine and how detailed it is and how it like actually lines up with stuff that's come to me, and it's just disturbing to me. It's just like they are tapping into something, and it's not something good. And that also begs a question: do you think there are any connections to these sort of groups and like the Epstein type groups? Because there seems to be some sort of global cabal of satanic secret combinations. Do you think there's any connection?
I have not seen any evidence that there is. So let's talk about what's in the Epstein files that has to do with Mormonism. So a few things. So Epstein does write an email talking about how he met with the leader of the Mormon Church back in 1989. And that's, I don't want to go into it too much. There's some problems there. The leader of the church was Ezra Taft Benson at that point, but Ezra Taft Benson had a stroke a couple of years previously, and from what I can gather, he was basically out of it, although some people say that he wasn't. And so there's some debate about, Epstein doesn't name who it was he met. He just says the leader of the Mormon Church. So that's in there. But that had to do with like nuclear fission, I think.
And I thought people were saying that it was Thomas S. Monson he met with. That's what I had heard.
Yeah, I think that's actually my fault.
Okay.
When I first found out, the email is dated at a time that Thomas S. Monson was the leader of the church. But when you go back and realize that he's talking about pawns, it's actually 1989. And you can find the hearing that he's talking about where they're talking about this with pawns. And so I think that was my fault that kind of got out there. And other people were saying it was Monson too. But I think we made a mistake in our research there. So there's that. The biggest thing out there is this idea of Mormon blood. And I actually have a show coming out with Emma, the Emmapreneur, on Thursday that talks about this Mormon blood letter that's in the Epstein files. And the idea there is that Jeffrey Epstein was paying the tuition and living expenses for a University of Utah student in exchange for a pint of Mormon blood sent to him every week. And so when we published that went viral. I had like 8 million views on that X post. And what ended up happening is a couple of people started confirming this. Like a journalist by the name of Walter Kern talked about people that he knew that Mormon blood is like a commodity, that some of these wealthy people who aren't taking care of themselves want access to Mormon blood because Mormons have a clean lifestyle. And then you have this guy that says he was P. Diddy's blood boy. So this idea that like that the Epstein network and people like Epstein are using blood transfusions to stop aging and that kind of a thing that would be like the one connection in through the Mormon church, but not through the hierarchy of the church. The other piece of it is simply that Park City appears to be a huge human trafficking spot. So you'll find in Epstein papers them talking about going to Park City all the time. And then you'll see an article where the guy says, we have to bring in the girls from out of state into Utah because we can't trust Utah girls. And so
here's something interesting. So I saw this as something that was apparently, I didn't actually source check this one, I want to say, but there was something that was supposedly from the Epstein files, which was talking about the alleged Illuminati bloodlines. And one of them said leaders of the Mormon church. And there's also
that's a document. I know about that. So
okay.
In the Epstein files, that's just a page from another document that's fairly well known inside of conspiracy theory circles that we don't really consider largely credible. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. But it's just
that's why I didn't check the source on it. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as I can tell, the other biggest connection to Epstein could be this. So we know that Spencer Kimball was leaving temple meetings to meet with the Khashoggi family. The Khashoggi family was attached to the CIA. They were like the biggest Saudi Arabian connection to the Central Intelligence Agency. In the mid-1980s, the Khashoggis were building what was called the Triad Center in downtown Salt Lake City. And at that very same time, Khashoggi was one of Epstein's clients. Okay. So right around that mid-1980s period, you've got Epstein, Khashoggi, Kimball, and then we have a picture of Elder Oaks meeting with the Khashoggi family at some dedication of a Triad Center building. And so there is that potential connection, although we've never directly connected Epstein and Mormon leadership. But this is around the time of Iran-Contra. It's right at the height of Mormon power inside of the government during the Reagan administration. And so I don't think it's too much of a leap to believe that there may have been some cross-pollination there between Epstein clients and Mormon leadership, if not directly Epstein and Mormon leadership, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And here's one thing I want to emphasize. I don't think people should leave the LDS church over this, because I'm sure people will take stuff out of context, whatever. I don't know how big these issues are for sure, because we don't know. We see these things leaking out and they get swept under the rug. It's like, what's going on? And we know the prophecies in the Book of Mormon, in the Doctrine and Covenants, say that there will be secret combinations. We had Ezra Taft Benson. There's a quote of his where he says something along the lines of that he's worried less about enemies outside the church and more worried about those inside the church office building. Do you know the quote I'm talking about?
I do. And Harold B. Lee had similar things. Yeah, there's been multiple leaders of the church who have talked about wolves in sheep's clothing and enemies within the gates. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I believe that the Isaiah prophecies are true. I think like it's very clear. It's like, okay, Isaiah is talking about the coming before the time of the Lord. And it's very clear that servant in Isaiah is preparing the way for the Lord. So similar to John the Baptist, and Joseph Smith made it clear in his translation of the Bible that the Elias was not just John the Baptist, that there's another Elias. And this is in the Doctrine and Covenants too, right? People forget these things that are supposed to happen. And so I think that's real, but I want to emphasize, what if, okay, so there are people who are expecting Joseph Smith to come back in another probation or resurrected as an angel, right? There's the idea that in some form, some way, the servant is the manifestation or embodiment of the Holy Ghost or the Spirit, or he has the Spirit of the Lord upon him, right? We see hints to this in Isaiah that at the very least, he's like a vessel for the Spirit of Jehovah, and Jehovah uses him as like a vessel or something, right? And that could be what the office of the Holy Ghost is, if the Holy Spirit is just like the energy of the Father and the Son, and he uses a vessel, right? But are you going to wait for that? Are you going to wait around for Joseph Smith to come on? Maybe Joseph Smith's here already, and he's just like sitting around waiting for you guys. Because guess what? Joseph Smith in his day, he was supposed to build Zion. There was stuff he was supposed to do, and many of these prophecies, if you look closely, they're conditional on his righteousness, and he did. And for 200 years, You guys have been waiting around, waiting to do what told. You haven't received any new revelation, new doctrines. I don't count like, well, they allowed tank tops now on the garments, so we received the new revelation. Actually, funny story on that. This is legit. Right hand to God. I swear to God. I actually believe in God. This happened. I was receiving some revelation about stuff, and I was being prompted by the Lord to do certain things. I'm like, okay, Lord, if you want me to do this, I need you to give me sleeveless garments so that I can like work out a lot and look really good. And I take it off and I'll like look really well in it. The next day is the day that the garments leak, the sleeveless garments. I swear to God. And I was out in Ohio selling solar, right? But that's not what I mean revelation. I mean like the Lord actually saying stuff. And then we have this sort of guessing voting game that goes on, which is very similar to the Catholic creeds, where it's like, I'm going to be real. The Lord never told us to not drink coffee. That didn't happen. I mean, maybe coffee's bad for you, but the Lord never said that. There's no revelation. I want you to point me to the revelation where thus saith the Lord, and then the voice of the Lord starts. I want you to point me to that. You can't find it, right? So for 200 years, people have been waiting for the Lord to tell them this stuff. And if you actually pay attention to the revelations about the condemnation and even in the Doctrine and Covenants says the fullness of the priesthood was lost. And I don't believe that's the authority. I believe that's the power. It is because of a lack of faith. The D&C 84, which Ezra Taft Benson and President Nelson both quoted, it starts by saying that the children of Israel refused to go up the mountain to see the Lord themselves, and that they were basically just like, hey, Moses, you go for us. You go talk to the Lord, and putting an intermediator between Jesus Christ and us, which he's the one mediator between us and the Father. And I think that's sort of what's brought on the condemnation, where it's this sort of weird celebrity worship culture that we have in Utah, where it's like, you shouldn't even be treating Joseph Smith like that. Like, I'm telling you, if Joseph Smith were here right now, like a lot of the people that are expecting him to return, they're like expecting Peter Priesthood to show up or blah, blah, blah. And Joseph Smith's like, as a kid, he was doing like weird magic rituals and all this stuff. And he was kind of arrogant at times, not gonna lie. And he even referred to himself, he's like, I am a rough stone rolling down a mountain, and the only polishing I've received is when one of my edges hits something, right? Like, he's not what people expect him to be, and most people wouldn't even recognize him if he showed up. So what are you waiting for? Because I personally think in Isaiah 28, when it talks about the drunkards of Ephraim, it says their garlands of glory are as a faded flower. I think that's you guys who you're like, well, Joseph Smith did this thing, so we're better than you Protestants, and he got this prophecy about the Civil War right, and we haven't done anything else in 200 years. We haven't received revelation in 200 years. I'm going to do a video on this using the CIA methods on the Gateway program that they've done. And some of the lectures on faith stuff. I taught a a random 19-year-old on Instagram to be able to get revelation. He told me stuff that was accurate that he couldn't have known. More revelation than we've gotten in 200 years. So it's your lack of faith. And here's what I'll say. You are the servant, and there are many servants, right? The servants were few, Jacob 5 says, and I think it's the same few who are not caught up in the pride of their hearts. I don't think that a new church is formed. I think what needs to happen is that the people in the church need to wake up and decide that they are the ones who are going to make a change. And if you are opposed to Gordon Bowen being involved in this stuff, because I think there's something in the Doctrine and Covenants about those who like put up with wickedness saying amen to their priesthood. Well, if you're knowing Gordon Bowen is doing this stuff, like you actually know it, and you're supporting him, well, amen to your priesthood. And maybe that's why David A. Bednar listed himself, a prophet, seer, and revelator, as one who could fall into that pride, because maybe he knew that other people could maybe support Gordon Bowen. I don't know. But we don't need to do that. Back in Joseph Smith's day, there were times where he was almost voted out as the prophet. I mean, not the prophet, the president of the church. And for a long time, they didn't even call the president of the church the prophet. He was just the president. It wasn't until later that they start calling it the prophet, right? And for the longest time, Joseph Smith was the prophet, right? So here's another thing. Faith is real. Quantum physics, and I'm going to explain this stuff. I'm not going to go into stupid theology. No, I'm going to go into quantum physics. I'm going to go into the observer effect. I'm going to go into Schrodinger's cat. I'm going to go into what the CIA said. Your thoughts do affect reality. You can literally will things to happen. And that's what Jesus meant when he said, if you have a grain of faith, a kernel, mustard seed of faith, you could move a mountain. And I've tested this stuff. I've seen stuff. This is why I believe in it. So if you guys want change to happen in the church, not only do you have to be willing to stand in truth and be the change rather than running away and making your own church, changing the community, but as you go to sleep tonight, and this is a method that works, I want you to pray, having faith it will happen, not begging God to happen. I want you to believe that, okay, if I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, having faith, something will happen, commanding it to happen, willing it to happen, bending it to happen, that this change can happen. And I want you to do that until you go to sleep. This is a method that works. I've tested it, and literally something that you wouldn't have been able to think would happen happened the next day, within 24 hours. And I'm going to bring on a kid, this 19-year-old, who witnessed that with me. You can, through your faith. So are you going to wait for one mighty and strong to set and order the house of God, or are you going to be one mighty and strong? Because sure, maybe they could, if there was just one mighty and strong, they could kill that guy. They could get rid of that guy. They could kill me. But if I tell you this stuff and I tell you faith works and then they kill me for saying this stuff, it would just make 100 more me's. It would just make a bunch more people like me, and it would just draw more attention to it. So it is up to you, and you have to believe that you can make the change, that you are the change, that you are chosen. You have to choose to be chosen. And I believe that there is going to be a wave of people who have that faith, who truly believe it can happen. So when you pray, you take upon yourself the name of Jesus Christ. So you're praying in his name. So you become one with Christ. He becomes your Father. And you pray to the Father in the name of Jesus Christ. And if you truly have faith and you embody that feeling, you know it's going to happen. You feel it. You visualize it as you're praying. It will happen. I promise you that your faith can change reality, and that is by faith that Enoch was translated. It's that by faith that the Red Sea was parted. It's by faith that Christ was risen from the dead. It's by faith that God has done all things that he can do. And the same Spirit of God that rose Christ from the dead, as Romans says, dwells in each of you. The Holy Spirit is in all things and through all things. And if the Holy Spirit is the servant, like we've talked about, well, then the servant is in you, right? And so, I mean it. Imagine if one person's faith can cause things to happen, imagine 20. Imagine if every person watching this live stream tonight, as they go to sleep, do that. It's a prayer technique, a manifestation technique. I found it out by a guy named Neville Goddard, and the CIA also tested it out on their website. You can look it up. It works. So do you want Zion to be redeemed? Do you want the house of God to be set in order? Do you want change to happen within the church? You have to be the change instead of waiting for somebody else to save you. And that's what I would like to leave this on. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fun. Like, it actually reminds me, I was Elders Quorum president multiple times, and I can't tell you the number of times that I sat down and had conversations just like this. And I guess my observation is just this. I've never met a member of the church who didn't have a great heart, right? And then there are all these issues like the ones that you're talking about, and there's a lot of curiosity inside of the church. And then you end up like with people like forming their own study groups, forming their own groups, and then some of them splinter off. You've got your Denver Snuffers who decides that he wants to be a prophet. You've got this kind of thing. And like overall, I guess all I'm saying is that like the way that I understand it and the way that I understood it is that the people who should be leading out on this are those 15 men who sit in the church office building, the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency. And unfortunately, it feels to me like they leave these things dangling out there, and they don't satiate people's curiosity. They don't give the answers that people need to keep them from sort of wandering down some of these paths and giving the answers. Because it's not like the things you're talking about aren't things that leaders of the church have never talked about. It's just things that the current leaders of the church don't want to talk about anymore, right? But if they're going to lead the church, they have to accept the history of the church in addition to what the church is as it stands now. And so I don't know. I didn't choose to leave the church. I don't think I would have chosen to leave the church. I wanted to do what you're talking about. I actually bore a testimony about a year before saying, like, look, we've been doing this for over 200 years, and yet, like, we want to argue that we haven't dropped into apostasy, but we also clearly haven't established Zion. I see no scriptural precedence for a group of people existing for as long as we have, not going one way or the other. So, like, we got to figure out, where are we on this path between apostasy and Zion? Where are we? And
you want to know something interesting? So one of the prophecies that people oftentimes do to be like, well, there has to be a new group. Like, I know that there's one group that they believe Joseph Smith's going to come back in another probation and he's going to start a new church or something. Or, we have the Denver Snuff or something. There is a line in 3rd Nephi, but if you read closely, what it says is that the fullness will come from among them. It doesn't say that the fullness will splinter off source. It comes from among them. And so Jesus Christ, you guys are waiting on him to make a move. Maybe he's sitting up there on his throne. He's like, what are you guys doing? What have you been doing for 200 years? You're waiting for Joseph Smith? Who knows? Maybe he's like, if you believe in multiple probations, maybe he's come down like 3 times already. He's just waiting around like, are you guys going to do something so I can do my job? Like, I'm waiting here for you. What are you doing? Right?
Yeah. And I guess all I'm saying, William, is like, there's supposed to be these 15 men who can clarify these things. There's supposed to be these 15 men who lead it, but then it goes. I mean, look, it's messy. I guess that's really the end result for me. It's messy. But here's how I want to end it. This is what I feel. I don't feel like you can create the Zion that we've been asked to create by employing men like Gordon Bowen to run the creative team for the open house of the Salt Lake Temple. So, like, no matter what you believe about anything, I think anybody who like takes a look at who Gordon Bowen is and has been has to openly acknowledge that there's been a mistake made by continuing to allow him to have a relationship with the highest leadership of our church and employing him for projects like the Salt Lake Temple open house. More than anything, I would like to see Zion built and manifest in this world. That was where my heart was as a member of the church. And I just don't think there's any way for that to happen when men like Gordon Bowen are being employed by the 15. And so my ask is that people take the time to learn, like, find out whether I'm telling the truth or not. It's all documented. Nothing that I said here tonight comes from my opinion. It's all documented. And so I would just ask that people take that and then decide for themselves whether or not they feel like it's important enough to bring to the attention of the brethren that they feel uncomfortable about the fact that this guy is working on the Salt Lake City Temple open house project. And then people can make their own decisions about what they want to do based on their own feelings about this.
Yeah. Look at this. Read this comment.
Yeah. Right.
So everyone call the church tomorrow and tell them how offensive it is to have an excommunicated Gordon B over the temple open house. That's true. And that goes in line with the manifestation stuff. So faith without works is dead. And again, I'm going to explain my understanding of this based on lectures on faith, because I truly believe that the supernatural isn't that supernatural. It is science that we don't understand. I believe that there is spiritual science that we don't understand. And I believe Joseph Smith was trying to teach these things to people, and that he understood this more. And that, like he said, if I told you everything I know, you'd kill me for blasphemy. But with the lectures on faith, with the school of prophets, with this stuff, he was teaching these type of concepts. And here's another thing. You want to talk about the 15 men? Joseph Smith, he had people witnessing the gold plates, witnessing angels, all this stuff. He still had something called the school of prophets, where he was teaching these type of spiritual techniques. He was training people's spiritual abilities, teaching them to receive revelation. And these were men who already had authority. If you go to D&C 113, it talks about how what Zion has lost is the power. So it doesn't matter, like, if you've received the priesthood authority, if you don't have the faith and the power to cause things to happen, it's like, for example, like, this isn't a phone charger. I'm not going to unplug Shane's phone charger. I'm going to use this. So let's say this is a phone charger. Do I have the authority to use it? Yeah. Is it plugged into the wall? Do I have power? No. So what does it matter? And when Jesus actually comes to the Nephites, you want to know what he does? He gives Nephi, who's the prophet at the time, the power to baptize. Now, I mean, this was the prophet. He's got to have the authority, but he lays his hands on and he gives him the power to baptize, right? Because the endowment of power does not come in the temple. The temple even tells you that's all symbolic. It comes from on high through faith. So the more faith you have, the more belief you have. Again, I'm going to go over the science of this. The more you can do these things. So this goes back to that. If you go to sleep tonight, as you go to sleep, I'm telling you, this works. Visualizing as you go to sleep, as you're praying, commanding it in the name of Jesus Christ, as if it's real, believing it's real, until you go to sleep over and over. Maybe even listen to some binary beats in your headphones, right? The CIA says that syncs up both hemispheres of your brain, helps you manifest stuff. And at the same time, if you guys were to call the church about this stuff, outrage, we've got 170 people on this live stream. I'm willing to bet most of the people aren't too happy about this stuff. And how many people are going to view this video later on? I don't know. Go do it. Yeah. Take 5 minutes of your time. Call it. Go to sleep. Manifest the changes in the church.
Or even better, William, like not everybody has to call. Like everybody can like this person feels like calling is the best thing. And apparently it sounds like, but there's a lot of different things you can do. You can go to your stake president on Sunday and discuss this with them. You can, I mean, like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to present truth to you and then allow you to take that truth and do whatever you want with it. You know, I had a conversation with a guy on X today. He's a member of the church who says, you're never going to convince a member of the church if you act this way. And I just told him, I'm not here to convince anybody. Like, I'm just here to tell the truth. Tonight, I've told the truth about who Gordon Bowen is, what Gordon Bowen has done, and the relationship between Gordon Bowen and the leadership of the church. People can take that and they can study it more, they can pray about it, and they can do whatever they feel is appropriate. And that may be nothing. I don't like, it's not, it has nothing to do with me, what you do with the information I presented tonight. I'm just telling you that I've just told you the truth. That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah. And yeah, I believe the Spirit of the Lord is upon all of you. I believe that the Lord has anointed you, just like Isaiah says. And I believe that your faith can change these things. Your action can change these things. Go to your sacred. Imagine, here's the thing. The church knows who Zion Media is. I can tell you that for a fact. They know who I am for a fact. So imagine what those people in those councils would think. If 100 people tomorrow call in or write a letter or go to their stake president or all of the above about this stuff, asking questions, saying we deserve answers because this is our church. Here's another thing. The culture of the church is wrong. We're not supposed to treat the leaders as celebrities. Jesus gave the best example by washing his apostles' feet. The greatest among them is the servant, the one who serves selflessly, right? So they are meant to serve us. They are meant to be our servants. This is our church, right? This is your church. This is my church, all right? The greatest among us is the servants, and it is a servant's duty to the people. So if we, the people, unite as one, and I don't care. You can hate me. You can think I'm crazy. You can think this about me. You can think that about me. I'm half the LDS influencers. They hate me, right? But you have to admit this is true, right? If you're like, send this to the Ward Radio guys, right? They weren't giving him a chance. Instead of saying like trying to, and this is why I hate apologetic stuff, is because it's like, well, Brigham Young never actually said Adam was God. Yes, he did. Yes, he very clearly did. And there's some different interpretations of what he meant. He's like, well, Michael's God, and then there's the grandfather God, Jehovah, and then there's the Elohim, and whatever. But he did. And rather than apologizing for the praise of the world, like Mormon chapter 8 says, that's what they're doing. If you were trying to get the Protestants and the Catholics to like you, and you're like, oh, well, actually, we didn't say that. Actually, Joseph Smith didn't say we could become gods. Yes, he did. He did. He pretty clearly said, as man is, God once was. So meaning he was a normal human like us. As God is, man might become. Right? Instead of denying these things, you should ask yourself, do you actually believe them? And do you care if the world cares? Because the people who are seeking truth will find it. So stop trying to apologize. Stop seeking after the praise of the world. If you're an LDS YouTuber and you're not bought by the church, or not the church, I should say the corporate side of the church, because I have faith. I sustain all the brethren. I believe they are who the Lord wants in place, but I have no need to sustain the church office building because they don't carry authority. But why don't you talk about this? Make a change. Be the change. Instead of trying to correct other churches, take out the beam in your own eye before you look at the speck in your brother's. Right? Because we've got a big beam in our eye with Gordon Bowen, with this stuff, allegedly. And I would never hurt myself. I want to keep emphasizing that. But it is up to you guys. And I'm telling you, just 20 people could make a difference. And there's going to be more than 20 people that see it. So you watching this right now, I'm telling you to do this. I'm telling you to use your faith to do this. I'm telling you to take action. I'm telling you, you are the servant. Thou art Israel. Who is Israel? God's chosen people. My servant, in whom I will be glorified. That's you. So be the change. And I believe that I can feel it, that there is a movement of people. And rather than having a splitting off of people who are just going to leave the church, I want to tell you, stay in the church and change it for the better. Don't be hypocritical Pharisees who care more about a cup of coffee than you care about this type of crap going on. It's up to you to be the change because God is waiting on you to stand up and do something. And that's what I'll say. So I think we should leave. We're going to end the live stream. It's at 22 hours, 21 minutes. We're going to end it at 2:22:22. Exactly.
What's that?
Right.
Is that that's the angel number thing, right?
Yeah, I'm big into numerology. I think it's legit. I didn't used to be. I thought it was stupid, but I've become convinced. I'm like, okay, that stuff can't be faked. Some of like the patterns and stuff. And I think that there is patterns and math and all this stuff and everything in physics and everything. I think that spiritually it's true too. And because I think spirit is just quantum science. And like in the Epstein files, he actually talks about how he believes dark matter and dark energy, these mysterious forces that we can detect, that we know run the universe, that is what spirit is made of, right? And Joseph Smith famously talked about how spirit is a finer substance than matter. So would that not fit into what dark matter is, where through the equations we can tell there is dark matter that exists, and it kind of is a force behind everything, and it makes up more of the universe than us. So
you got 4, 3, 2, 1. You got to stop it. Oh no, you missed it.
Oh shoot, I missed it. Well, do what I said.
No. What are we going to do now? Everybody should still call the church office building.
Yeah, still call the church. Still go to sleep manifesting it because that technique works. It is legit. And use your faith, because the faith of somebody like you who actually knows that all is not well in Zion is greater than the faith of somebody that would rather just fall asleep and eat, drink, and be merry. I'm telling you that. But yeah, because you're already spiritually in tune. So yeah, I will end this.